All right, so let's talk about avoiding business decision-making disasters for you as Vistage members. And as the previous member who introduced himself talked about, the large majority of decision-making disasters come from people disasters. So we'll orient a little bit more toward people disasters, but other disasters as well. Let's talk a little bit about what do I mean by decision disasters. What is that about? Well, disasters, really, any sort of disasters in your business come from two types of decisions. Two types of decisions. That's what the research shows about the things that lead to disasters. In my pragmatic experience, I've been doing this for over 20 years, consulting, coaching folks in middle market companies like Vistage and other smaller and larger ones. So, two types of decisions. One is active decisions that lead to disasters. Decisions that you make, that your staff make, or a series of decisions that lead to a disaster. That's one type of disaster. And of course, disaster is anything that seriously negatively impacts your bottom line. So that's our definition for disaster. And the other type of decision that leads to a disaster is failing to foresee a disaster. So where you're going forward, you're not making the right decision, and that leads to a disaster by failing to foresee the future that is quite problematic. That's the second type of decision that leads to disaster. So that's where disasters really come from. Bad decisions, either active decisions or failing to make the right decision. Now, let's talk a little bit about some examples of this. And I want to go a little bit into first studies so that we understand the broader context, the broader framework, and then we'll go into in-depth examples. I want to look at large companies. So first, study of 423 US companies. By the way, all the things that I'm talking about apply just as much and more to middle market companies like those that Vistage members run. But I want to show you that this goes very much for large companies as well. So there was a study of 423 large companies in the US, 500 million plus in assets, that went bankrupt from 1981 to 2007. Notice it doesn't include the fiscal crisis of 2008, 2009. So it's before the fiscal crisis, which swept away a number of companies that were otherwise doing reasonably well, depending on the situation. That's before the fiscal crisis. So that span of period, looking at those failures of those companies, the study found that 46% of all failures in that sector, 46% came purely due to bad strategic decision-making by the leadership. The bankruptcies, again, stemmed purely from bad strategic decision-making by the leadership. And this is something that is eminently avoidable. This bad strategic decision-making, very much avoidable. One great example, so you probably heard of Polaroid, shake it like a Polaroid picture, right? So that's a really powerful company. I mean, I still remember taking those Polaroid pictures when I was younger and shaking them, getting those out. Well, Polaroid was looking at the future in the early 1990s, and it saw that, hey, digital cameras were becoming more and more popular. And it had a great brand, snap it like a Polaroid picture, right? It would have been great if they chose to do this transition. But what they saw was that digital cameras had a much lower profit margin than their physical film. In their physical film, they had a profit margin of 62%. On digital, they estimated a profit margin of around 30%, so obviously much less profitable. So they decided to not go into digital. And lo and behold, what they found out was that 62% of zero is still zero, and they went bankrupt in 2001. By contrast, Fujifilm made a different strategic decision. They faced the same dynamics, the same profit margins from their physical film and from digital, but they saw and recognized the uncomfortable reality that digital was increasingly popular, and they decided to squeeze their photographic film business for maximum revenue and invest it into digital. And they're still doing fine today. It's a $6 billion company. So that's an example of bad strategic decision-making versus good strategic decision-making. Now, one of the most common ways that this bad decision-making comes is by denying reality, as Polaroid did with denying reality, and that was a really negative outcome, of course. And it doesn't only have negative outcomes for companies themselves, it also has negative outcomes for the leaders of those companies. There was another study of 1,087 members of boards of directors that fired their CEOs, fired their chief executive officers. And this study showed that 23%, so over a fifth, were fired purely for denying reality, just denying negative reality about their company, about what was going on, about the situation. They didn't want to face the truth. And it's so easy to not do that, but it has such painful consequences, ignoring negative information. Now, I want to highlight that most of our decisions come from emotions. In fact, about 80 to 90% of our decision making comes from our emotions, according to the latest research. So denying reality comes from feelings of fear, comes from anxiety, coming from excessive pride, hubris, arrogance, denying negative information about reality. That's where those feelings play a really important role, and whether for the leadership of Polaroid or so many other companies that made bad strategic decisions and that ruined their companies, of course, went bankrupt, or ruined the careers of their CEOs. So we need to understand that decisions are driven by emotions, and we need to address our emotions, how we feel, in order to make the right decisions. Now, they might think of that this is academic, rational, logical. No, this is not simply rational and logical. Overwhelmingly, in order to make good decisions, you need to understand your emotions, and just as importantly, the emotions of your employees, of your staff, and other stakeholders with whom you deal with. So when we do what comes naturally to us, just go with our gut, we go with our emotions when making decisions. And here I want to talk a little bit, so Tony kindly introduced me. I want to talk a little bit more about my context, my background, where I come from, so that you know how I come to give you insights on decision-making, on risk management, strategic planning, which all lead to avoiding disasters and making the best decisions and succeeding. So a little bit about me. Now, my experience, I've been doing this work as the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, and earlier as a consultant, coach, and trainer for about 20 years. As I mentioned before, in risk management, decision-making, strategic planning, and disaster avoidance. And I also spent 15 years in academia researching these topics as a cognitive neuroscientist and behavioral economist. Cognitive neuroscience has to do with the study of our brain, how our brain works, how it causes us to make certain decisions, make good decisions, make bad ones. And behavioral economics has to do with how we behave in economic situations. So I published about these topics in a number of prominent journals, academic peer-reviewed venues, behavior and social issues, Journal of Social and Political Psychology, and so on. And as Tony mentioned, I had a whole bunch of clients from innovative startups to Fortune 500 companies, from Aflac to Xerox, and I work a lot with middle market companies like those of Visage members. So I know what I'm talking about, and will be bringing up examples actually mainly from Visage members during my presentation. I published over 550 articles and gave over 450 interviews to prominent media venues like Inc., Time Magazine, NPR, CNBC, Fast Company, Newsweek, Scientific American, and so on. And I published a number of best-selling books. So 3 best-selling books and 1 new one, which hopefully will become a bestseller. I'm really well known for Never Go With Your Gut, how pioneering leaders make the best decisions and avoid business disasters. And that's with Career Press, all traditionally published, great focus on business decision-making, career decision-making, financial decision-making. Then the blind spots between us, how to overcome unconscious cognitive bias and make better relationships. That's with New Harbinger Press, and that focuses on our relationships and effective communication. The Truth Seeker's Handbook, a science-based guide. That is a book that focuses on how do we figure out what is true and how do we address some of these problematic beliefs with other people. And my newest one is called Resilience, Adapt and Plan for the New Abnormal of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. So that's where I come from, but I want to highlight that I am not a perfect decision maker at all. I don't want to assume that I am the be-all and end-all in any way. I still make mistakes myself. So one of my biggest mistakes recently, within the last few years, was when my wife and I have been doing consulting, coaching, and training, as I mentioned, since 1999. And she's been doing that a little bit earlier, since 1998. She's been working so I work with for-profits, companies of various sorts. She works with nonprofits. we decided in 2014 that we wanted to create together a nonprofit devoted to popularizing the information on good decision making in all life areas. I've been doing consulting, coaching, and training, but I wanted to get this out to a broader audience, so popularizing this information. So we created a nonprofit called Intentional Insights, and then we started planning and strategizing for going ahead. And then we started having a lot of conflicts, a lot of fights, a lot of tensions. And it was hard to figure out. I would propose some ideas and she would shoot them down. I would suggest a new direction, innovative, out-of-the-box thinking, and she said, no, we need to go with the old thing, the traditional thing. That's how we need to go. And there was so many conflicts, so many tensions, so many stresses. We couldn't figure out what was going on, why we had so many conflicts. Finally, about 2 months after this, after we had a lot of difficulty, this certainly impacted our personal life, obviously, having these very negative, tense conversations about this civic engagement, civic activity which we're doing. And we'd never worked on so closely on such a major project before. We started to try to figure out, okay, let's look at the dynamics between us. What is going on? Why are we doing these problematic things? Why is there such tensions? And what we figured out was that we were falling into dangerous judgment errors, and I'll talk about this, called cognitive biases. And this is an area of expertise for me. How do we make bad decisions? What are the specific patterns in our brain that cause us to make bad decisions? So I tend to be very optimistic. I tend to fall into the optimism bias, and I run company disaster avoidance expert, 6-people company. I have to be pretty optimistic to start up a company, as many Vistage members are very optimistic when they start up a company, because of course, about half of all startups fail within the first 5 years. About 2/3 fail within the first 10 years, and 3/4 fail within the first 15 years. So if you're starting up a company, it is natural for you to be very optimistic, to be visionary. I look at the future and I see opportunities. I don't see threats very well. I tend to be risk blind, and that's a problem. And I tend to have very high expectations for myself and other people. And that is bad because, I wake up in the morning and I have 20 ideas and I think they're all brilliant. Not necessarily the case. But she falls into the other camp. It's called the pessimism bias. So that is another cognitive bias where she looks at the future and she sees it as more of a hostile place, a place of threat. She looks at the world and she sees the risks, but she doesn't see the opportunities. So whenever I brought up ideas in my kind of visionary mode, looking at the world in the future, she would feel threatened. She would feel that it's a risk, and she would shoot them down. She would argue with me. We would have tense confrontations about what's going on in the future. Now, once we figured out this dynamic, we're fortunately able to work around it in such a way as to collaborate together effectively. So instead of me having 20 brilliant ideas, or ideas I thought are brilliant, and then presenting it to her and she shooting them down, I would then instead just say, hey, look at these ideas. How can they be improved? Which of these ideas can be taken forward? And she'll look at these ideas and she'll say, these are all half-baked potatoes, but these 3 are the least worst, and we can try to do something with them. And then she'd fix the flaws of these ideas, and then she'd be implementing them very effectively, because she's pretty terrible at generating new ideas, but she's great at figuring out the flaws of the ideas that are generated and then implementing ideas going forward. And that's something that I started to bring to my clients for when there's a lot of tensions between optimists and pessimists on their team. What I noticed and what I looked at the research is that the typical way that we do brainstorming is very flawed, because optimists do brainstorming and then pessimists do brainstorming, and then they have tensions and conflicts. Pessimists are really pretty bad at brainstorming. It's not their strength. Optimists are great at brainstorming, but then they hold on too tight to the ideas they create. Much more effective than that, than coming in a group and doing brainstorming, according to the research on brainstorming and optimism and pessimism bias, is having everyone come up with ideas before they come to the table, and then optimists will come up with a bunch and pessimists may come up with a few, and then put them all into an anonymous pool of ideas that you have there, maybe add a little bit more, discuss the ideas, and then evaluate the ideas. And optimists are not great at evaluating ideas. Pessimists are great at that. So that's where they bring their different strengths. And that's a much more effective way of going forward and collaborating. So that's an example of the kind of mistakes that come from bad decision making, about how to collaborate together, and teamwork and collaborations. I want to, at this point, have you take a look at the polling option. So if you haven't done polls, you'll look at the screen and you'll have an option to vote. And I want to ask you, was there a time when you were very confident about something and you turned out to be badly wrong, like I was about with my wife and the nonprofit we're working on together? And as a result, you felt doubtful about other areas where you might be wrong, as I was about my relationship with my wife and had a lot of tensions and conflicts and stresses as a result of that interaction. So please go ahead and vote. Okay, got 85% of the people voted. Okay, perfect. Everyone voted. Thank you very much. All right. So as you can see from the results, you should all be able to see the results there. You'll see that, yes, there's definitely the case for folks in this group that there were times you were very confident that you were right about something and you turned out to be badly wrong. And this made you doubt about other areas where you were wrong. And I totally understand that feeling. It's very uncomfortable. It's stressful. It's straining. And it's a threat to my sense of self, my personality, my view of the world. And that's something to realize, that this threat, this perception of being wrong, it's something that causes us to make it difficult for us to acknowledge other areas where we might be wrong because we don't want to have that experience. But something that is very important to learn, that I learned and that I very much advise and encourage you to learn, is to orient toward that feeling and appreciate that feeling, because it gives you the opportunity to update your beliefs, to see a better model of the world, to acknowledge that all the time, at all times, we are wrong about something. Something that I learned is a really great technique to address the decision errors we all tend to make as human beings, called cognitive biases, is to acknowledge that right now I am definitely wrong about a number of things in the world. There's things that I perceive to be true that are not true. And that really helps me build up that level of humility about myself, about my view of the world, about how I'm going forward. So when I notice something that doesn't square with my view of reality, I don't try to ignore it. I don't flinch away, but I say, hey, let's explore this. This is something that I might be wrong about, and this is something where I can get better at, where I can get more right at. And of course, this very much aligns with what Vistage members try to do, be more right and less wrong. And this is a really important quality to develop, the quality of humility in your ability to make the right decisions and to see the world correctly, because you can always improve it. And this is what this meeting is about. How do you improve that? And that, of course, helps build up your resilience, as Tony mentioned in the beginning. So let's talk a little bit about my background, because I'm sure that there was something that a number of you thought as I started speaking, not as you saw me, but as I started speaking. So, where are you from? This is a common question that I get. It's obviously, I have an accent, and it's not an American accent. It's clear that it's not from around here. Well, it's from this little country called Moldova in Eastern Europe. My parents came from there when I was 10 years old, and they took me from that country in 1991. So I was born in 81. My parents came to the United States when I was 10 in 1991. Obviously, I had no choice in the matter, but I was very glad that they did, because I discovered in 1996 there was a survey of happiness, the World Values Survey of happiness around the world, and Moldova was actually rated the least happy country in the world, which was unfortunate for Moldova, and I was very glad that I'm not living there. So I grew up here in the United States in New York City. That's my hometown. Now I live in Columbus, Ohio. I much prefer that. Go Bucks. So this is definitely something I much prefer, to live in Columbus rather than New York City. And sorry for any of you New York City fans, if there are any out there, but Columbus is much more livable. But while I was growing up, so my parents came here, was growing up, and a lot of people chose to drop their accent when they were here as young as I was, or even younger. They chose to drop their accent. But my parents taught me to be proud of my cultural heritage, and I kept my accent as a way of connecting to my cultural heritage. Well, unfortunately, I found out later that was kind of a dumb decision if I wanted people to trust me, due to what's called accent discrimination. So accent discrimination is a phenomenon where people discriminate against those with foreign accents. There's only one accent that, in the United States at least, there's no discrimination against foreign accents. And that, of course, is the British accent, because they still have that cultural imperialism going for them. It creates all other accents create a false perception of being less trustworthy, and this applies to regional accents as well. So if you're, let's say, if you are in New York City and there's somebody from the South with a Southern accent, that creates a perception of being less trustworthy. And if you're from New York City and you're in the South and you have the New York accent, then you're also going to be perceived by people around you as less trustworthy. So there's regional variation as well. And that's something to realize. It's part of a broader pattern called the halo effect and the horns effect. The halo effect and the horns effect. The horns effect. If you dislike one characteristic of someone, you will tend to dislike that person as a whole. Then you have too negative a view perception of all of their other characteristics. And if the halo effect is the opposite, if you have too positive a view, if you like one characteristic of someone, then you'll have too positive a view of all of their other characteristics. This is especially damaging for all sorts of business relationships. I'll tell you about a case study of a Vistage member. So a Vistage member, I was doing a presentation for a Vistage group a while ago, and the Vistage member then, who was in the COO position of a company, called me in to do a little bit of consulting for the company because they had this halo and horns effect going on pretty badly. This was a real estate management company, specifically one that provides outsourcing for HOAs, condominiums, and so on, boards of condominiums, so volunteer boards. What they do is they give this company provides all sorts of services from them, from accounting to financial services to landscaping to plumbing, so that they basically take care of everything. And so each client is pretty high ticket, so ranging from $50,000 to several $100,000 if it's a large condominium and there are several scattered across, a wealthy one, something like that. So this was a company. It used to be a regional company, but then it began expanding pretty quickly around the country by doing mergers and acquisitions with a variety of local companies that did the same thing. And as part of expansion, as this mergers and acquisitions, it started having tensions between its central office and local offices. The central office managed all the back-end operations, everything like that, while the local office managed sales and customer service. So that was local offices around the country, regional offices to manage sales and operations, sales and customer service, and the back-end was managed at the center. There was, as an example of this case study, what they specifically, the guy called me in to address was that there was a tension. He described this clear tension between what was happening in the center and what was happening in the regions. So there was one regional manager where a client worth $120,000 a year, this board, volunteer board, they wanted to change the way something appeared on their financial statement. And so the regional manager called back to the office and said, hey, can you change this on how it appears on their statement? And the central office said, no, we can't do that. We have strict guidelines and procedures. We are not going to change the way that appears. And so they started having emails back and forth about this, and eventually they escalated because this wasn't the first time. They had a number of tensions around these sorts of issues. And then they started using caps lock and criticizing each other pretty harshly. They started CCing the COO, who was not pretty happy with the situation. Eventually, he told me that they started acting like psychopaths on email. And you know what? You never want your boss to think you're acting like psychopaths on email, right? But that is how they were acting, and they didn't realize that that's how they came across. So that was a big problem for the COO and for what was going on. So we looked at the situation. We saw what was going on. My company saw that it was essentially the halo effect and the horns effect. And that happens very often within companies between different units of the company. The regional offices all had halo effect toward people in their offices and toward other regional offices. They had alliances, collaborations, versus the center, which had halo effect toward people in the center, that local team, and horns effect toward people in the offices. Because the people in the regional offices, they really cared about customers. They were very customer-centered, customer-oriented, sales and customer service. That was their thing. Whereas people in the center, their thing was following policies. Policies, procedures, operations, that was their emphasis. And that was not great, that was creating some pretty bad dynamics, some pretty serious tensions. So we did a lot of education about the halo effect and the horns effect, about the tensions that are created and how to collaborate effectively around the halo effect and the horns effect, how to deal with these issues, specifically to be aware that you're likely to be suffering from these and to agree as a company which orientation you're going to go. Are you going to go toward operations and procedures, or are you going to be customer-centered? The COO and the CEO and the C-suite eventually decided that the customer-centeredness should prevail over standard operating procedures and processes. And so they devolved more power to the regions to make decisions and overrule the central operations staff in some cases. So that also helped these dynamics, where it was pretty clear which way things would go. So that's an example of halo and horns effect, how they harm dynamics within a company. And of course, hiring, promotion, all of that is harmed by the halo and horns effect as well. Okay, I'd like you to take a look at the polling option. And I'd like to ask, in your company, in your workplace, how problematic is the halo and horns effect? Oops, hold on for a second. There was a problem with the poll. So 85% of the people voted, so I'm just waiting for one more. Just 3 more seconds. All right, so take a look at the results. So we see that for 15% of the people, one person, it's a serious 17%, whatever. One person's a serious issue, and for the rest of you, it's somewhat of an issue. So we see that there are some problematic dynamics around the halo and the horns effect in a variety of companies, in your companies. And this is something for you to realize, that this is a dynamic that's going on that you need to think about how to address effectively, because it's either somewhat serious or quite serious. All right. Let's think about what's going on. Why do we make these decisions? What are the dynamics here, so we understand what our thought processes are? You'll probably see a lot of advice to go with your gut, follow your intuitions, trust your heart. That's what gurus tell us. Tony Robbins tells us to be primal, be savage, and so on. This is very comfortable. It feels good to go with our gut. It feels good to trust our gut, but it often leads to disasters. Like sometimes with the halo and horns effect, that leads to disasters. Now, that's of course a feeling in your gut of what is the right thing that unfortunately leads you in the wrong direction. And we need to realize that our gut reactions, our emotions, our intuitions, the problem is they're evolved for the savannah. That's what they're evolved for. They are not part of our modern world. Our modern world, our modern business environment has really been around only since World War II. And that's something we need to realize that's relatively recent. So we are not evolved for the modern world. And as a result, we suffer from dangerous judgment errors. These mental blind spots, the formal term for them is cognitive biases. So if you're going to be looking them up on Wikipedia or elsewhere, you'll see that they're called cognitive biases by cognitive neuroscientists, behavioral economists, and other researchers. That's the formal term for these dangerous judgment errors. And they come from 2 aspects of who we are. One is our evolutionary background, so how our brain is wired due to the need to survive and thrive in that environment in the ancient savannah, and the structure of our brain, just the way that they're cross-functional structures of our brain. Won't go into the details about this. But the crucial thing you have to realize is that there are going to be a number of dynamics that come from the Savannah environment that cause us to make bad decisions in the modern environment. One of the biggest ones is called, so we talked a little bit about tribalism already. So tribal being tribal, that's pretty problematic. We lived in small tribes of 15 people to 150 people. It was very important for us to be tribal. And that's where the halo and horns effect come from. We look for other people who have our values, who have the same processes, thinking systems that we do. As an optimist, it's very intuitive for me to hire other optimists, for example. That's a very bad idea, because then we'd be reinforcing each other's positive ideas and negative ideas, and then we'd have too many ideas, we wouldn't know which ones are good or not. Of course, then I know I need to choose to work with people who are pessimists as well as optimists in order to filter my good ideas, supposedly good ideas, and actually pick out the best ideas. So that's tribalism. Now, the other really important dynamic to realize is how we respond to threats, how we respond to external stimuli, which we overwhelmingly perceive as somewhat dangerous. The fight or flight response, our main response to threats, it was great for hunter-gatherers because they faced threats that were immense, that were immediate, intense, in the moment. You might have heard of it as a saber-toothed tiger, where we have to jump at 100 shadows to get away from that one saber-toothed tiger. That's a very powerful response, but it's a very dangerous in today's world, because that's not the kind of threats we face in the modern environment. The risks are long-term, ambiguous, uncertain. It might come from an article that was forwarded to you from a notification on your smartphone about a disease developing somewhere in the middle of China that eventually turned out to be very, very problematic for us, and that a lot of folks made bad decisions around COVID-19, of course, and they did not realize how to respond to this sort of threat. This is a typical case where we don't respond well to such threats that are long-term, ambiguous, uncertain, low probability, high impact, and slow-moving. Now, one specific cognitive bias I want to talk about that is especially important. You might have heard about this. If you talk about cognitive biases, this is going to be the most famous one, confirmation bias. We tend to see the world through rose-colored glasses. I already brought up the study that where so many CEOs were fired for denying reality, and that's confirmation bias. We tend to look for information that confirms our beliefs and ignore information that doesn't. That's a very dangerous pattern and very harmful for us. We underestimate information that does not fit our beliefs. So we look for information that fits what we already believe, and we reject information that challenges our beliefs. That is the kind of tendency, the dynamic that we fit within. I'll give you an example from a Vistage member. So this was a story that a Vistage member shared with me after a training. This Vistage member owns a manufacturing firm of just over 110 people. And he was managing the firm fine, everything was going fine. He owned the firm since 1970. He told me this story about 2 years ago. So he's been managing the firm for over 30 years as the founder known. And things were going fine, but he had a pretty bad situation in 2001. So he had a very negative situation come up in 2001. He had a right-hand man who was with him for, 2 years after the founding of the firm. This person came on board. So with him for a very long time, VP of sales, doing really outstanding job. But the CEO noticed that sales were suffering a bit. So he asked his VP of sales, hey, what's going on? Can you tell me about this? And the VP said, okay, I'm taking care of it. Don't worry. And he trusted him. And then about 9 months after the VP of sales said that he was taking care of it and it was getting somewhat more serious, but the CEO trusted him, the VP of sales suddenly left. And he went to work for a competitor. And then he started taking clients from the Vistage members' company into the competitor. So this was very upsetting, frustrating, incredibly disappointing for the Vistage member. So he tried to figure out what's going on. And then he started looking at the sales records, and he started figuring out that sales had been going down partially, as he did an investigation, he figured out that sales were going down partially because the competitor 9 months ago started getting leads from from the clients of the company and other sorts of information, inside information on the company. And he found out that the VP of sales was secretly feeding the competitor company information about sales, about clients, about prospects. And this was unimaginable for him. He could not imagine that this was actually happening. But he got corroborating evidence from a number of people, and it indeed turned out to be the case. And he tried to figure out why. And then he realized that about a year ago, the company went for a bit of a restructuring, the leadership, and they hired a COO. The VP of sales was up for the COO position, but the Vistage member, the CEO and founder, preferred to keep him in the VP of sales position. He wanted some new blood to make decisions in the company, strategic decisions, better strategic decisions getting forward in operations. So this VP of sales apparently was quite frustrated and upset and felt betrayed. And so he decided to pass information to the competitor and then get a position or working for the competitor who hired him as the COO in the role. So that was what happened. And then the Vistage member started looking back, and he saw that there were very many signs that the VP of sales was increasingly disengaged, and he was secretive. He appeared and behaved like he was hiding something. He was taking information home from the workplace. He was doing a lot of shady things that he really shouldn't have been doing. But the CEO just ignored these signs. He just said, told himself that, hey, this is not something that I should worry about. This isn't a problem. I'll deal with this. This is all fine. He just ignored this. He thought that his friend was just not, and this was not simply a friend. He was a member. He went over to his barbecues and all that. He was also a member of his church. So they had a lot of community ties. Just thought that, something was wrong. But, this is something that he ignored, and he realized he fell into the confirmation bias around the team. And so that was a pretty serious issue. And he became the CEO, the Vistage member, became much more oriented toward controls and toward trust but verify as his motto going forward as a result of this situation. But he really wished he had learned this lesson before, which would have, he told me it took him about 10 years to recover from this situation, from the setback with clients and prospects and so on. So pretty serious issue. All right. So this is not going to be a poll. I'd like you to talk about what we've discussed so far, and specifically with the confirmation bias, Helen Horn's effect, decision-making, and this case study in particular, if you wish to bring it up. But I want you to talk among yourselves. So go off mute and discuss what are the implications for your company. We'll have about 5 or so minutes of discussion before we go on to the next steps of the presentation. So please go ahead.
All right, in that last poll, who was the one that voted serious that might want to discuss why they did that?
Oh, you know who it was. It's always me.
Not always. I guess wrong.
I always go. I think everybody probably plays it down a little bit. The reality is there's probably more dysfunction than we all want to relate to. But I just put it as serious because I think in smaller companies like ourselves, we're constantly kidding ourselves that we're always having these issues. And it's like, what's this next month going to be, or the next chapter? And it's always related to subjects like this. So I think it'll always be serious to small business. That's why I put that.
I think I'll just give you a perspective, and that is that as organizations broaden themselves, like for instance, TVH, Jennifer, do you tend to see more of that in the different divisions that you have?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. When we do engagement surveys, the communication and collaboration between locations and between departments is always very lowly scored. It's something that we're constantly working on.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's what I would think. Randy, how about you all?
Can I add one thing to my comment earlier? What I'm meaning by this is we all are always I mean, everybody across the board in Vistage is always like, we're on the cusp of brilliance and but the edge of a challenge at any one time. And so what I was saying is basically, it's like, we think we have the recipe going well, and then it's like, boom, what he just talked about and gave the story a moment ago happens to us, and we lose a COO or a president or a VP of sales, and it's, damn it, we got to go back and grind again. And that's what I meant by that. It's like we're constantly, as the group, going through this, and every one of us are going through different segments of it at any one time.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually just had a similar situation. I mean, the individual, the sales manager wasn't, you know, selling or passing information to our competitor, but he is leaving for a customer. And it's, you know, kind of a blow to the organization. You have to pick up the pieces and figure out how you're going to deal with it.
Well, and sometimes in depending on what level of employee you have, it starts a dialogue of how can I say this, dysfunction, and then it's up to you as the leaders to take that dysfunction, because you don't know who's right, and figure out how to listen to them, and then sometimes make your own decisions. You know, we've gone through that a lot. You know, it's the old Mark Twain saying, you know, it ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know that just ain't so. And that's a leadership issue. I mean, Andrew, you're going to have this as you get more and more, as you go into new initiatives, but as you get different divisions.
Yeah, no, the thing I was going to say too, that what you were just going down the path of, is with respect to, you know, you certainly want to get as much opinions as possible and as much feedback as possible, but then it's, at the end of the day, someone has to make the decision, right? And some people aren't going to like that decision, and it just has to be done. One of the firms that we've been talking to from an acquisition perspective, that's the challenge that they have, is they're trying to be so diplomatic, diplomatic might be the word, so democratic about any decision making, and so nothing gets done because you've got all these varying opinions, and no one ever says, okay, this is all good, I've got the data, here's what I think, here's what we're doing. So
yeah, I will say, you know, you all know that our international headquarters are in Belgium, and it's a very different culture of decision making there. It's very consensus based, and it's a challenge that we have between the two companies on a regular basis. You know, we want to move through and make decisions. They want to get everybody around the table and talk it to death before we finally get to a decision. So it's a consistent challenge for us.
Well, fortunately, we'll be talking about a technique to make decisions, that are structured decision-making techniques that you can use throughout your organization to get everybody on the same page and to build consensus. So just letting you know that that's going to be a second part of the conversation. And we'll go on about 60 seconds, so just finish up
One other comment that I learned from my friend Peter Schutz, who was the former CEO of Porsche for 11 years. And Peter used to say, listen carefully to all of them and use democratic decision-making, but dictatorial implementation. And that really works. Once you have all decided, you as leaders, dictatorially implement. Okay, Dr. Gleb, back to you.
All right, excellent. Thank you, everyone. So, really appreciated hearing the discussion. It's very helpful for you to learn about each other's opportunities for improvement. And as I said, we'll talk about standardized decision-making techniques, processes, a little bit later on in the presentation as the solution to these cognitive biases. I want to run through a couple more cognitive biases, these decision-making errors, so that you understand the kind of things that tend to go on in companies and with case studies from Vistage members and from others. So, normalcy bias. This is a big one. We tend to, from the Savannah environment, the future in the Savannah environment was not going to be changing. It was going to be shifting of seasons, winter, spring, summer, fall, and so on. we weren't going to have much change. So intuitively, we don't feel like we will have much change in the future. If we imagine ourselves in the future, we probably imagine a little bit older version of ourselves, maybe a little bit wiser, hopefully a little bit richer, and that's kind of the future that we envision for ourselves, for us individuals. But if we look back 5 years ago, we'll probably see that we're very different people. I mean, I can definitely say that I'm a very different person in many ways than I was 5 years, 5 years previously. But I don't feel that way about my future self. I don't feel that I'll be very different, unfortunately, because most likely I will be. So that is something that I have to overcome and that all of us have to overcome around the modern world, because the modern world is full of disruptors. COVID-19 is a huge major disruptor, and that's applied to a lot of companies. Didn't realize how much of a disruptor there'll be and how many other potential situations like COVID-19 there are out there. Of course, the fiscal crisis of 2008, 2009, huge major disruptor, very much problematic. Technology of various sorts are major disruptors, but we don't feel it. We assume, we feel that everything will keep going normally. So we underestimate how the short-term future will not, by that I mean in the next couple of years, will not look like the short-term past. And we underestimate these major disruptors. So I'll give you a case study. I mean, you all know what happened with COVID-19. I'll give you a case study from a large company, from Boeing. Boeing, the 737 MAX, when we look at the 737 MAX and leadership decisions, it's becoming a classical case study of bad decision making by the leadership. The leadership of Boeing had a lot of information that the 737 MAX was fundamentally flawed. I mean, there were emails inside the company saying that, this is a plane designed by monkeys, supervised by clowns. And I'm quoting here from the release of internal emails in January 2020. The leadership had a lot of information that things were going wrong, things were not right with the 737 MAX. But what happened with the 737 MAX is that all of their previous models of their newer models, so at all times in the past, since the 1970s, the newer models that Boeing put out of airplanes were safer than the past. And they were indeed safer. They had less accidents, less problems, so if you look at the statistics. So they couldn't imagine that the new model, the 737 MAX, could possibly have more problems than their previous models. They just couldn't imagine that. I mean, it was more fuel efficient, it was better for them, customers really wanted it. And so they said, okay, it's going to be at least as good as the previous one on safety and better in fuel efficiency. So let's go forward with it. And of course, they cut a lot of corners with FAA approval and so on, and they got themselves into a heap of trouble. It wiped out $20 billion in value for Boeing even before the pandemic. $20 million, it's hard to imagine a number, but that's what happened with Boeing and the normalcy bias. So this is an example of how it can hit one company. And of course, COVID-19 is an example of how it can hit the globe as a whole, large industries, not realizing this as a situation. I mean, pandemic insurance is something you can buy as an additional rider on your insurance, but very few people bother to buy it as an example. So let's take a look at the polling options. And it's going to be a poll like the past. And I'm curious to learn and for you to share about, in your workplace, in your company, how problematic is the normalcy bias? Okay, see that most people voted, so still waiting for a couple of people. Wait, okay, everyone voted, perfect. All right, so let's take a look at the results. So we see that there's pretty even distribution. It's not a problem for 2 of the people, so 25% said it's not a problem. It's a serious problem for 25% of you. So of course, the ones who are thinking that it's a serious problem, this is something to really look at and do and take steps in the pretty short term, within the next week, for you to look and think about this. For those who think it's a moderate problem, this is something to incorporate into your planning going forward, maybe within the next month or so, to address and think about. But especially for those for whom it's a serious issue, this is something to start addressing pretty short term. All right, let's take a look at another cognitive bias, which is huge. This is the planning fallacy. Now, we tend to assume that the future will go according to plan. You've probably heard the phrase that failing to plan is planning to fail. Again, failing to plan is planning to fail. Well, guess what? This phrase is quite misleading, unfortunately, because it presumes that once you make a plan, things will go fine, you won't fail, everything will go well. This is not the case. Plans go awry very often. What I tell my clients, what I strongly advise people to think about and realize is that failing to plan for problems is planning to fail. Again, failing to plan for problems is planning to fail. It's a much more effective phrase, much more accurate one, because we tend to greatly underestimate risks and problems associated with plans. And so we don't build in the time, the resources of various sorts, money, social capital, strategic capital that's necessary for making the right decisions. It applies to all sorts of large projects. So for example, when you look at construction projects, larger construction projects, you'll see that about 86% of them tend, according to a study in 2002, 86% of them went over time and over budget. Then if you look at large IT projects, like launching a website or implementing a new database or CRM, you'll see that about 84% of them went over time and over budget, according to a 2007 study. So this applies to large projects especially. Mergers and acquisitions. There's a reason about 70 to 90% of mergers and acquisitions fail to create value. So they actually destroy value, unless you are very careful and thoughtful about going forward. So merging, I know one of the Vistage members when talked about merging and acquisition, you can do it right. I mean, some of them succeed, but you need to really address a lot of planning fallacy issues, because there are so many moving parts and components and dynamics that go within a merger and acquisition that we tend to not address when we really should. So this is a major issue. There was a training I did for Vistage where one member, this was during the training, shared about their story, that what they were doing was a serious problem. So what they were doing this was a heavy manufacturing company of it was heavy industrial manufacturing. So they manufactured various pieces of machinery for manufacturing, for mining, all stuff like that. And each of their projects was a pretty high-ticket item, somewhat high-ticket item. So let's say they bid $2 million on the project, and then they'd come in at $3 million. They'd bid $6 million on the project. They'd come in at $8 million. And this was persistent. This was something that happened all the time for them. And so then after the presentation, we talked, we examined what was going on for their company. And what I found was that they were, after they finished the project, I looked at their processes and systems, they didn't go backward and see what went wrong. They didn't evaluate the problems that went with previous projects. They just went forward. They went forward to the next project, the next project, the next project. And honestly, they were losing money on over a third of their projects. And I'm being very serious here. It was something like 36% of their projects were losing money. So that was really bad. They were coming in, their costs were higher than their profits. So this was pretty sad for them. So that's something we looked at, and we made some changes. Now, in the future, they looked at their previous projects, and they looked at their projects, and then they looked at what they can learn from them. So what do they need to change going forward in their internal systems and processes? That's one. And second, and there were some tensions with sales about this, but eventually they got on board with this, was that they started integrating their previous experiences from projects into their bids and new projects. So again, integrating the previous experience into their bids and new projects. And that was something that, well, they were often not simply the lower bidder, they were sometimes the highest bidder on projects, but often they would come in the middle or higher, because they started integrating this into the projects. And they started describing that, hey, this is what I saw go wrong in the past, this is why we're making this bid, and this is how we'll address it going forward. And you know what? They didn't lose more. They started actually winning. They kept winning just as many bids or a little bit more, because the clients had more confidence in them, because they wrote out that, hey, this is what went wrong in the past, and this is how we can fix it going forward. So they were actually really successful with this. They went from losing money on 36% of the projects to losing money on something like 7 or 8% of the projects. So this was a really very good, and obviously had bigger profit margin. So this was a really good step for them. So
We call that contingency planning.
there you go.
Brad Carlson does a really good job of debriefing each week, and then having a stand-up in the beginning of the week so that they have a plan for the week, and then they debrief what went right, what went wrong, and how we correct next week.
That's excellent. So yes, these are definitely things that you want to be doing, and especially integrating that information into new projects as well as part of the process, which the sales team had a little bit of difficulty with, but we eventually got them on board. Take a look at the polling options and how problematic is the planning fallacy in your organization, in your workplace. Go ahead, 50% of the people voted, so still waiting for a couple more. Okay, so let's take a look at the results. You should all be seeing the results. So you'll see that this was about the same level of seriousness as the normalcy bias. Not a problem for 2 of the people, so for 25%. It's a serious challenge for 25% of you, so for 2 people, and for the rest, it's somewhat of a challenge. So that's really important for you to understand. If it's somewhat of a challenge, there's definitely areas where you can improve it, and you want to be thinking about improvements. Planning fallacy is one of these, is a really well-studied phenomenon, behavioral economics and so on, and we know that there are many techniques to address it. And I just described 2 of the techniques that were helpful for this company. There are going to be many others. You have the option of getting a book about this later that you can use these techniques, but it's a serious challenge. You really want to be focusing on this. This is one of those things that costs you a lot of money. So this is a really big deal, this planning fallacy, obviously. Okay, great. Let's go on to one more, and we'll be talking here, transitioning to talking a little bit more about emotions, how people feel, people decision-making, the empathy gap. So we talked about emotions, how emotions very much determine our decision-making. 80 to 90% of our decisions come from our emotions, but we often don't understand that, we don't recognize that, and we especially, with the empathy gap, has to do with underestimating the importance of other people's emotions. There's a gap in empathy that we feel toward them. So that's literally what this cognitive bias is about. We tend to assume that those people are rational decision makers, and we fail to predict their decision making and their behavior. So this is the fundamental dynamic that's going on here. I'll tell you about a client that allowed me to name them. So then they gave me a testimonial, which is the only reason that I would talk about them, saying this very thing. This is Edison Welding Institute. It's a middle market company here in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm based. What they do is they provide engineering consulting services. So they come into manufacturing, mining companies, other companies like this, and solve technical engineering challenges for them. It's a welding institute, right? It's in the name. So various hard engineers. What they wanted to do was get these engineers to be more engaged in the marketing and selling process. Marketing and selling, by this, what they wanted to do was have them write white papers, blogs, do more conference presentations, and also be willing to accompany the sales team when they went on sales presentations, and then be able to engage effectively in the sales presentation as part of the sales presentation. Well, the engineers really didn't want to do this according to when you see their behavior. They were given training on it, they were given encouragement, they were told how important it is for the company, but it just wasn't happening. They weren't doing marketing, white papers, and so on. They were fascinated with they did the technical challenges, but they weren't really interested in doing the marketing and selling effectively. So the management got increasingly frustrated. This was a real source of tension between the operations, the sales team, and the HR VP, Mark Madsen. So like I said, only naming him because he gave me a testimonial about this. He knew me and he brought me in to see what's going on about this issue. Well, I did a number of interviews, focus groups, and so on. And what I discovered, what I brought back to Mark Madsen, is saying that, hey, Mark, these engineers, what they're really passionate about is looking at the technical challenges that the sales team brings them and then solving these technical challenges. They're not passionate about about doing marketing and selling, so they don't have emotional investment in this. This is a serious issue. And Mark looked at me and he looked me in the eyes and he said, engineers have emotions? And this might sound funny to you, but he was very serious. Mark Madsen, so he is the HR VP. HR people tend to be quite emotionally expressive. They tend to have a lot of emotionality in their tone and so on. Engagement. Salespeople also tend to be very, very emotionally expressive. Engineers tend to not be emotionally expressive. They tend to come off as cold. That's kind of the image of Mr. Spock for those who are Star Trek fans. That's the kind of image that engineers have, and that's how they often behave. But of course, they're driven by emotions. Everybody is. They just don't show these emotions, these emotional drivers. So this was a big challenge. This was a big problem, and we worked on it. We looked at what can we do to motivate engineers. And of course, this is not about finances. Finances, if you look at the research on motivation, after you get to a middle income lifestyle, something like 50 to 60,000, maybe 70,000 in New York City, then you're not really motivated by emotions, except if you're in sales. There's an exception for sales. But they're not motivated by money except in sales. So people aren't really motivated by money after they have a sufficient amount of money. With that exception, they're motivated by other things. So we looked at what their engineers were really motivated by, and they were really motivated by a number of factors, including status. Status is a very fundamental motivator. If you think back to the evolutionary environment, in the tribe, it was very important for us to have higher status in order to survive, thrive, and procreate. Those who had higher status had more resources, so they survived better, and they had more sexual partners. They were able to pass on their genes better. So we are the descendants of those who were very status seeking, and that's just in the nature of who we are, to be tribal and to be status seeking. And we changed, so we looked at the status dynamics and we were able to influence those. The people who were rewarded as employees of the month, which is definitely a status symbol in the company, we could change that. We changed that from the people who solved fascinating technical problems to people who gave great sales presentations, so the engineers, or people who did great marketing for white papers, conferences, blogs, whose blogs went as viral as they could for engineering blogs. So that was something that we could change. And then we changed who was praised in the company newsletter. They had this section of highlighting people. We also worked and eventually this took a little bit of a longer time to change the promotion process to get people who are doing marketing and doing better sales as engineers higher up in the promotion process. So that was a really great transformation that eventually ended up very much motivating engineers to do much more marketing and selling, and that was quite effective. So that's an example of how you can bridge the empathy gap. As you can guess, there will be another poll. So take a look at the poll on the empathy gap. And they want to ask, in your workplace, how problematic is the empathy gap? So please vote. Okay, I see that almost everyone voted. One more. Okay, 3 more seconds. All right, so let's take a look at the results. So the empathy gap is somewhat less of a problem than the previous ones. We see that for 43%, just under half, 3 of you, it's not a problem. But of course, for 2 of you, it's a serious challenge. It's a serious issue. And that's something for you to be thinking about. What kind of empathy gap exists? How can you bridge it effectively by getting people emotionally motivated and getting people on the same page about the importance of emotions and driving us to how we behave? And for the 2 of you, it's somewhat of a challenge. So this is something to be thinking about at least in the moderate kind of timeline of a month from now. The others maybe within the next week. All right. So we're going to be switching now to talking about how to address these cognitive biases. So we gave a number of examples. We saw how they functioned both within Vistage members, their companies, and within larger companies as well. Let's talk a little bit about how to solve them. The first solution comes from understanding that you need to go against your intuitions. This is uncomfortable, this is hard, it's hard for me to do, going against what's comfortable for me. But we need to understand that our intuitions, they're great for that savanna environment. That's what they evolved for, to help humans survive, but they're pretty dangerous in many ways in the modern environment for making decisions, professional decisions, business decisions, and even other decisions. What about health decisions? So I think you already do this. I'm pretty sure all of you do this in your health decision making. Now think about the savanna environment. In the savanna environment, it was very important when we came across a source of sugar to eat as much of it as possible. Honey, bananas, apples, that was critically important because that's how we survived and thrived. We're the descendants of those who ate as much as possible when they came across that source of sugar. But in the modern world, it's a bad idea to eat all the sugar that we can. I mean, think about coming across a box of dozen donuts, right, left in the break room. When you start eating those donuts, you should probably stop at that first donut, but it's very hard to stop at that first donut because sugar, when we eat sugar, causes that primal instinctive triggering. And that is something that a lot of food companies, of course, use in the modern environment to not to have us eat a little bit too much for our own good, for our own physical fitness. I mean, when the serving of donuts is one donut, but it's really hard to eat one donut when they actually sell donuts in a box of dozen donuts. Or what about a gallon of ice cream? The serving is half a cup on a gallon of ice cream. I mean, show me this person who eats half a cup of ice cream. This is a very weird person. So you need to understand that this is something that's primal, that's triggering, that's emotional. And you probably came up with some techniques for yourself to address these primal triggering emotions of sugar, perhaps by, instead of eating the donuts or eating the ice cream, eating a healthy bowl of fruit. Now, that's not nearly as triggering, and if you overeat peaches or apples, not going to be nearly as much of a big deal for your health. But this is something that we need to understand, and we need to train ourselves to go against our intuitions for the sake of our physical fitness. And you've probably done this in many ways to have habits that don't align with your intuitions on physical fitness, whether in what you choose to eat for your own health. Salad might not be the best tasting thing, but it has a lot of nutrients that's really important to eat. And then, of course, for your doing exercise, gym, and so on, maybe not gym right now, work out at home, depends on the context of COVID-19 in your environment, but that's something that you're already doing. Now, we also need to apply the same dynamic, not simply to physical fitness, but to mental fitness, our ability to make good decisions. It's fundamentally important, but we tend to forget how difficult it is to make good decisions, to make the right decisions. So, right now, I want to talk about a specific technique that's going to be one. So after we talk about this technique, we'll take a 10-minute break. So assessment and dangerous judgment errors in the workplace. The first way that you address these dangerous judgment errors is to understand them. You need to understand what are these dangerous judgment errors? What are these cognitive biases? In order to solve them. And specifically, you need to see how they're causing you pain, how they're causing your company pain, and you need to help your employees realize this. They need to realize it because it's not only you, of course, you're the main decision maker, but you're not the only decision maker in your company. You need to get other people who make decisions on a daily level, all employees, especially the leadership team, understand how their decisions tend to go wrong and how you can address them. The assessment on dangerous judgment errors in the workplace focuses on the 30 most dangerous cognitive biases in professional settings and enables you to evaluate the extent of their impact on your workplace and provide you with the next steps for addressing them. So that's what it's about. That's what the assessment is about. And I'll right now share my screen so that you can see what the assessment is about. So Matt says that he has to go. All right. You hope they don't know about the Lewis bias test, use the Hale effect on me. All right, Matt. Well, thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. You have a great day. If you want resources from this, just message me and I'll get you the resources from the presentation.
Well, he has a bank meeting right now.
Yeah, okay, cool. So let's take a look at the assessment on dangerous judgment errors in the workplace. So all of you should be able to see my screen. Correct? Look at the screen, please. And I want to make sure that you're seeing the screen. So take a look at these questions. These are the kinds of questions. There are 30 questions in the assessment, and the goal is to think about how often these happened in the last year as a percentage of when they could happen. Just take 10 to 15 seconds, 15 to 20 per question. Think about how often they happened over the last year as a percentage of all times that they could have happened. So percent of projects that missed the deadline or went over budget. Think about all the times in the last year when you had projects that missed the deadline or went over budget. What percentage of all of these projects went over deadline or missed the budget? Please put that in the chat.
So is this something that's available to us? This
Yes.
30?
Yep. I'll send that after the presentation.
Okay.
So please put that into the chat. What's the percentage of projects that missed the deadline or went over budget? 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. I had one Vistage member put 98% about 5 months ago.
Can I'll answer for Matt.
Sure. So Jeremy says 15%. All right. Other folks? Jennifer, 25%. Just give an approximate number. You don't need to think hard about this. So Matt, 80%.
Are we just doing one right now?
Pardon me?
Are we just doing number one?
Yes, we're doing number one right now. We'll go on to number two next.
I was gonna hit you up with like 5 of them. All right, I'll type in it in a second.
Perfect. Yeah, just put in your number. Looking at the range of, what's going on. Okay, so majority over 50%. Brad says 90%. So we see that there's a large range, and I mentioned that this is, I get everything from 5% to 98% for our Vistage members sharing on this. And this, of course, has to do with the planning fallacy. So we saw, based on votes, that for a couple of people, not much of an issue. If you're the 50%, 15%, that's not too much of an issue. 10%, 15%. If you're getting into the 20s, 30s, that becomes more of a moderate issue, 40s, 50s, over 50% that it becomes a serious issue. So for Matt, Randy, and Brad, that's a serious issue, because if you're missing the mark on some of your projects, then of course you're not investing the money into other projects that you plan to do. Then the plans are going to get screwed up. So this is a very important to realize how this tendency impacts you negatively, impacts your company negatively, and math it out. Just look at the math, look at the statistics, look at the numbers, the budget, and how it hurts you, and then what you can do about it. Okay, so
the what you can do about it is the important thing.
Yes.
And that's not so easy sometimes, because you have to really do a deep dive into this thing. Like for instance, take math, there's a lot of dynamics that go into this.
Of course. Yes.
Yeah, this is also too. The question's interesting because we run several different companies, and inside of it, like we do manufacturing, we do projects that might be related to our operating system. Like I would run it like a 98% like accuracy at hitting projects or internal objectives. But when it comes to our actual specialty build-outs that are super complex, we're off 90% of the time. So it's a subjective question, just gaining clarity from my perspective.
Yes, I mean, it's clearly, and you were focusing then on the specialty build-outs 90% of the time. That's, of course, that's the area to focus on. And I mentioned the company in Pittsburgh, the Vistage member company in Pittsburgh, they had a number of issues, and they were able to address it through the continuous learning and applying that to future projects. So that's something to look at, and we can talk about. I'll be happy to have a free coaching session, again, no costs, with whoever wants to, and we can go deep into what's going on in your company with this issue, other issues, and look at how to solve. But there are definitely ways to solve each one of these cognitive biases. The assessment goes over it very briefly, and the books will go over it in much more depth.
Yeah, just to add to that a little bit, I mean, there'd be some similarities between Brad's business and our business. And, we've struggled in this area a lot. I mean, and, one of the things you start with is, is it because we can't execute or is it because we can't estimate? I mean, so from an overall standpoint, we're trying to get our head around that. For us, I mean, we see, I don't mind sharing this, but we see about an 8 percentage point difference between what we sell at and what we execute at. So I mean, for us, it's pretty easy to quantify. It's how to go about it. And I mean, we are tracking on a monthly basis. I'll call it sold margin versus executed margin. We're seeing the gap narrow. I mean, we've hired a company to basically put more structure around our whole project management process to try to narrow that gap, because it's a big number for us. And probably, and without a doubt, the single one thing that we could do to improve our bottom line.
Excellent. Good. And that's very important to realize. That's the dynamic that's going on. And I'm glad that you're working on addressing it. And this presentation, the steps to address the planning fallacy, the book and so on, will help you do so. Like I said, I'll happy to go more in depth into it in a coaching session afterward, free of course. But this is something to realize is an issue that results from how our brains are wired, and some of the tensions between sales, estimation, operations, and so on. And that there's a number of dynamics that can be going on. But learning and improving, which it sounds like you already are, putting in some structures, is really a very effective strategy. So you'll see that that's the first question. And all the other questions are like this. They talk about behaviors. What are the behaviors that you see due to the cognitive bias, due to the specific dangerous judgment error? So there are 30 cognitive biases. This, of course, is the planning fallacy. And 30 questions. That helps you understand which of these is the biggest issue for you and which of these you should focus on going forward. So that's what the assessment is about. And like I said, you'll get a copy of that. And I want you to take a look at the polling option right now. How helpful might it be for some or all of your team to take the assessment in the workplace and discuss it? This is something that I've seen teams do pretty well in and get a lot of benefit from. So I want you to see, now that you've taken a look at it, what do you think about it? What do you think about it and its applicability to your team? I see 42% of the people voted. Okay, 5 more seconds to vote. All right, great. So we see that it would be moderately helpful for 20% of you, one person, and very helpful for 80% of you. That's great to hear. So send it around for whoever wants. You can get your team to take it. What it's great for is a needs analysis, essentially. You get to an idea of what's going on in your company, what the problems are, and from different perspectives. It's especially revealing when some people think that one pattern, cognitive bias, is a problem, others don't, and then you have a very fruitful discussion about it. It's really great at revealing hidden problems and obvious problems, the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. So both those are very useful. All right, so at this point, we'll take a 10-minute break and we'll reconvene in 10 minutes. Let's go. So let's talk a little bit about how the next steps. So we talked about awareness and emotional investment. The assessment will help you get awareness and emotional investment, both for you and, just as importantly, even more importantly, for others in your organization who are making all sorts of decisions that sometimes are not the right ones. So let's talk a little bit about what structured decision-making techniques we can use after we get the awareness and emotional investment. What structured decision-making techniques can we use to make the best decisions? I'll talk about 3 techniques. 1 for daily, casual decisions that you don't want to screw up. 1 for major decisions that you want to make sure to get as right as possible, so as perfect as possible. And 1 for your strategic planning. So strategic planning for the next few months or few years. Those are the 3 techniques that we'll talk about right now. So, the daily decision-making technique. This is something you should be using 2 to 5 times a day. Some folks use them more often, but this is something you should be using at least 2 times a day, 2 to 5 times a day, depending on what your day looks like. These are 5 questions that you can use to avoid decision disaster, avoid screwing up on any decision that you make. So again, avoiding decision disaster. First question, what important information didn't I yet fully consider? So what evidence didn't I take into account? This is a critical question. As you saw from the cognitive biases, there are tons and tons of occasions when we don't take important information into account, when we look past it because it doesn't fit our beliefs, it's not comfortable, it's not intuitive. That's why so many of the CEOs were fired, because the information that they're looking at, they're ignoring uncomfortable information. So what you want to look at instead is to look at twice as hard at information that goes against your beliefs, that goes against your preferences, that goes against what you want to do. Look for it, weigh it heavily, twice as heavily as information that aligns with your intuitions, because it's going to be just intuitively very hard to take that information nearly as seriously as you should. So look for that information, weigh it heavily. And you know what? If you find out that your decision is wrong after you look at that information, that's great, because then you can make a better decision. And of course, if you don't find such evidence or it's weak, then you're more likely to be making the right decision here. Second, what dangerous judgment errors didn't I yet fully address? So think about what cognitive biases didn't you take into account. There are lots of them. We talked about 5 cognitive biases. The book that you'll have the opportunity to get if you want at the end of the presentation, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, talks about the 30 most dangerous ones in professional settings. And another book that you can get, my book on COVID-19, Resilience, Adapt and Plan for the New Abnormal, the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, and included for free as part of your Vistage membership. You can get that, and that talks about the 5 most dangerous cognitive biases in the context of COVID-19. So this depends on the decision that you're making. Next, what would a trusted and objective advisor suggest I do? So think about that little angel on your shoulder. What would that angel suggest you do? What would you tell a trusted friend to do in this situation? You get about 50% of the benefit by stepping outside of yourself and specifically asking that question. What would I tell somebody else, a trusted friend, to do in such a situation? And you get the other 50% of the benefit by asking, calling your trusted and objective advisor, or if you're a millennial, texting this person. Someone from your Vistage group, obviously your Vistage chair, perhaps one of the other Vistage members who are suffering from some of the same challenges that you are, or who went through them and who succeeded in them. This is one of the benefits of the Vistage group, that you get to know about folks, what challenges they went through, what they succeeded. This is one of the times to call this person, call for help. Next, how have I addressed all the ways this could fail? So think about any decision. It can fail in a whole variety of ways. We talked about the special build-outs where 90% go over time or over budget. That means that there's some kind of failure, some kind of things going wrong, that the decisions didn't go according to plan. So what are all the fun and interesting ways that your decision can fail? Think about them. Imagine that the decision already failed. You've got to start this not by saying, oh, it won't fail and so on. It's hard to go against your intuitions when you feel a decision will go in the right way. So you got to instead imagine, that's the research on this topic talking, not simply me. Imagine that the decision absolutely, utterly failed. That gives you emotional permission to certain parts of you within you and parts of your team, when you do this as part of a team, to go through this and say, okay, what are all the reasons why this decision failed? What are all the causes for failure? And then you can address these causes in advance. That's the best thing about this, is that it didn't already fail. You can address these problems in advance. And finally, what new information would cause me to revisit this decision? What would cause you to change your mind? It's really hard for us to change our minds once we make a decision. Just honestly, that's once we make a decision, we're emotionally invested into this. It feels harmful for our ego, our sense of pride, our sense of leadership, our sense of self, to reverse a decision, to change a decision, unless we built into it, you bake into a decision the parameters of changing the decision. This is a very effective step, and it allows you to go forward, make decisions while knowing that, hey, this is going to be something that will cause me to change the way I make a decision. I'll give an example of how you would apply this to something you probably do every day or nearly every day. Write a significant email, substantial email to a client, trying to get that client to do something that perhaps would be a little bit of a hassle for the client to do, but you know the client should do this, the client knows that they should do it. It will be better off for everyone involved if the client did it. So, first question, what important information didn't I yet fully consider? Well, it would be tempting to write the email and ignore all the reasons why the request would be, a hassle, stressful, the reasons that you're aware of at least. But, it would be, but of course, the client is going to be aware of these reasons. So if you address the objections in advance, you say, hey, I know it's going to be a hassle and a stress because of this, maybe other reasons, but both of us know that it's going to be worth it in the end because of reasons, A, B, and C. That's going to make it a much stronger email, make it much more likely to do what you want them to do. The planning fallacy, let's say dangerous judgment error. The client can be falling into the planning fallacy about this. And you could say, hey, you might want to take a little bit more time than you anticipate you'll need to do this because it's taken me, X, Y, and Z to do beforehand. A trusted and objective advisor. You can show your email to someone who is your trusted and objective advisor and ask them for feedback. Quick read over. I told you I'm an optimist. This is very intuitive for me to be an optimist and to be very oriented toward the good things happening. So I tend to miss things that are risky or problematic in emails, and therefore I let my wife, who is now working with me in disaster avoidance experts, so she's the co-founder, she works on nonprofit part of it, I work on the for-profit part of it. I let her read important emails to clients to minimize the likelihood that I'll screw up. How have I addressed all the ways this could fail? There are a number of ways it could fail. Your client can be in an area of the country like Arizona or Texas or Utah that's suffering from outbreak of COVID-19. All of these states have, to some extent, or some regions in these states, I think Oregon, Arizona, Utah have all ceased their reopening process because there's an outbreak of COVID-19 in all of those states, and some of them might even be rolling back their reopening. So what if your client is in one of those areas? Well, they're probably somewhat upset about the situation that's going on. Maybe their kids are still home from school, still crawling all over them. So they'll be in a bad mood, distracted. You want to read the email as someone who's in a bad mood and to someone who's distracted from that perspective, and see how you can address it to remove elements that would be negatively interpreted, hostile potential manner or guilt-inducing, and then draw the client's attention to the most important parts of the email. And finally, what new information caused me to revisit this decision? You could say something like, hey, in a week, if I don't hear from my client, I'll give them a call. Very clear, very effective. You know what you're going to do. You can let it go. Otherwise, you'll be wondering every day, well, why am I not getting the email response? What's going on with the client? It's very easy to get into that ruminating thought cycle, to have some anxiety around this. Whereas if you have a revision point, you can just let it go. Whenever ruminations come up, you can say, you know what? No, I set a clear decision-making revision point in a week, and that's when I'm going to call a client. I know what I'm doing. I can let it go. This series of questions has been questions like this. They're actually very easy to go through. I went through them in just a couple of minutes, and you can take a couple of minutes to go through them for every decision that you don't want to screw up, those daily decisions. It'll cost you money, a lot of money, a lot of time, or significant money, significant time, many hours if you screw it up, many thousands of dollars if you screw it up. Those are the kinds of decisions. I'm not talking about things that will cost you many days or many months or, hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is stuff that's those daily decisions that you need to make and that are significant but not, critical to your bottom line. This is what you can do. And these questions like these were applied to, there was a study done on firefighting leaders in the UK. Now, what the study showed is that firefighting leaders in the UK, I'm sure it's the case everywhere, about 80% of their mistakes come from human error. So 80% of mistakes that cause them property damage or, of course, cost lives come from human error. So what the team did that was doing the research is they trained these firefighting leaders on asking a version of these 3 questions that they can apply specifically to their needs as firefighters before sending their people into the flames, into addressing the heat of the moment. So they were literally deciding in the heat of the moment what to do. Now, after firefighting leaders were trained on these questions, it took a couple of months for them to become intuitive, for it to be easy for them to ask these questions. There was another comparison study done between firefighting leaders who were trained on questions like this and those who weren't. And what the study found was that they were making decisions about the same pace, so just as quickly. People who had this decision-making process and for whom it was intuitive because it got to be a mental habit, and those who weren't. But people who were asking questions like this were making much fewer mistakes and costing much less property damage and lives. So this was a great improvement by just asking a few questions. Now, think about if all of your team members ask these questions. If everyone in your company asks these questions before they make those daily decisions that matter. That if your sales team, before writing sales messages that were significant, ask these questions. If your operations team, before making operations decisions, ask these questions. How much better off would you be? How much better off would your company be? Would cost only a couple of minutes to ask a question, but how much would it save? And my clients have found that it actually has a very tangible and clear savings in team decision-making processes. When there's a meeting to decide something, let's say they're deciding something at their weekly staff meeting, what my clients do is have everyone come to the table having answered these questions in advance around the question at hand, around the issue at hand. And then everyone gives their individual answers. So it's really helpful that they have them prepared in advance. It saves time and it makes sure that they're not weighing each other's answers. And then they discuss each question in advance. They discuss each question in turn. So it's essentially an agenda for the meeting. And they find that the decisions they get are quite a bit better, and it takes much less time to make a decision because everyone has an answer in advance and their decision-making is structured. So that's for daily decisions. I want you to take a look at the poll. So see the polling right now. And I want to ask, how helpful might it be for some of you or all of your team to use these questions for daily decisions? So please vote on that. How helpful might it be if they use these? So we're 5. Great. Perfect. All right, everyone voted. So let's take a look at the results. So you see it's going to be about half and half. A little bit more would find them moderately helpful, and 43% would find them very helpful. Great. So I'm glad to hear that it would find it either moderately or very helpful. And it's pretty easy to integrate this into your team. So having everyone ask these questions, that just becomes part of your systems, part of your processes, building these into your business systems and processes. I want to...
And you don't have to use all, depending on where it is
Yes.
in the company, do you really have to use all 5? There might be 1 or 2.
That's what I took. Perfect. Yes, thank you very much for bringing that up, Tony. So I wanted to open up the floor for questions and discussions like this. They're going to be different. These are 5 questions, and you can use different questions. You can use all 5. Now, all 5, they're structured together in such a way to make, it takes only a couple of minutes to go through. Some decision-making processes in your company, in your systems and processes, might not require all 5. So depending on your systems and processes, all 5, each question takes care of specific cognitive biases. So that's the benefit of using all 5. Now, I want you to take some questions. I want you to take some reflections on using these questions, where they might be helpful, where they might not be helpful, before we go forward. So please go ahead. Let's talk a little bit about this. So unmute yourself before you talk.
Yeah, I think that as I reflect on these questions, they could be very helpful in a board meeting or a management meeting, a small management meeting or a board meeting, of which I'm on a lot of boards.
Mm-hmm. yes, definitely boards find these quite useful for any agenda around answering a specific question. That's definitely the case. Yeah, so board meetings are definitely a place where they're helpful. So please go ahead, Brad. I think you had
Another one also might be, when we have visionaries that are mostly Vistage members, and when they're considering a new initiative. I was with Kevin yesterday. He'll be here at 11:30, but Kevin's looking at initiative. He calls it X, rather than the two that he's been doing. So I think these questions, as you gather information around new initiatives, can be helpful to yourself.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Tony. Other folks?
I guess the thing that comes to mind is, Tony, that's probably, this is probably your coaching style. At least that's been my experience with you. I mean, rarely when I'm bringing an issue to you, do you give me the answer. You mostly ask questions about what that is and kind of guide. So it's always I don't know how many times in my coaching sessions it's like, I hadn't thought of that, or thank you for asking that question. So you tend to guide, at least me anyway, I'm sure the other people in the group here, you tend to guide us through asking questions and challenging us more than just telling us or giving us an answer.
Yeah, which I think is something that all of you can do with your people, because that's how they're going to grow.
I mean, from my perspective, I look at it, this has been a great segment, and this could be something that we implement, we teach the team members from maybe an executive perspective. We utilize it when we're making decisions, and then it becomes part of their, basically just helping increase their emotional intelligence. And so I think it's great. I mean, I think this is a tremendous tool that could be utilized from business all the way down to just, general decisions. So I think you summarized it really well. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Brad. Yes, so this is definitely something that folks find helpful to make it part of their own systems and processes. Executives, supervisors of all sorts, of course, pushing it down to the frontline staff. But yes, this definitely increases emotional intelligence, awareness of how your emotions are driving you and how to address these emotions, which are sometimes driving us in the wrong direction. Okay.
You could use this with your spouse and exchange the word I for you.
Definitely, yes. So romantic decision making, yes. You can do this with your kids, actually. That's quite helpful as well.
Yeah, actually, with the kids, it's probably a better application.
Just have to make it fun.
I think one of the most important things that you just said was the fact that if you take the emotion out of it, it's much easier to address these questions and answer them, I guess, sincerely. Not only for yourself, but also your advisors or people that you brought in to help analyze whatever situation or whatever initiative that you're facing. Just over the last 2 weeks, we've been nose deep in a possible acquisition, and I can see by these questions we probably only focused in on about 2 or 3 of them. The biggest one being trusted and objective advisors. Obviously, we went to bankers, we went to accountants, we went to M&A people, we went and tried to, get their perspective on all this. Maybe the only question that we didn't truly address is the ways this potentially could fail. We decided, as I said earlier, at the outset, take the emotion out of it. It might be a competitor that you've been, fighting against for years, and you would like to overtake them, shall we say? And but anyway, yeah, this is excellent stuff.
I'll give you a good example. One of the mistakes I made once, and this would have probably changed it. So we had a bunch of processing plants, meat, beef, chicken, pork, and we also had a different company that did sanitation in processing plants. And the president came to me one day with a proposal to buy the largest sanitation company there was. And he said, once we buy that company, we they're doing business with all our competitors. We could own the sanitation because it's required by the federal government. So it all seemed well. He put together a good plan and all of that, and it seemed right. And we ended up buying the company, and 2 years later we shut it down. What we didn't consider was the competitors did not want one of our affiliate companies, for competitive reasons, cleaning their processing plants.
That's a really good insight, and that's one of the ways it can fail. That question definitely would have been helpful. Yes, thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to get back to what Brad talked about in terms of emotions, and tie it back to what Tony was talking about, implementation. So you want to very much differentiate and separate the emotions from the decision-making stage. When you're making decisions, that's not the right stage for emotions, because our mind tends to get heated, tends to get overwhelmed, and we can very much make the wrong decision, not consider really important facts. When you want to use emotions to inspire yourself and motivate yourself to move forward is in the implementation. So that's the right stage to inspire others, to inspire yourself, to motivate yourself. That's the right stage to get emotional, passionate, competitive, and go forward. So that's the kind of differentiation that both my business practice and the literature on this topic shows is very important. All right. Great. So let's take a look at, hold on for a second. Let's take a look at another technique. And this technique will be, how do you make the major decisions, really serious decisions, ones that you don't want to screw up, like mergers and acquisitions, like launching a major new product, and so on. How do you make those decisions? What are the most effective questions to ask, techniques to take, steps to take? And there's going to be a 5-step process that I want, an 8-step process that I want to take you through in this one. So 8-step process, going one by one. Identify the need for decision. You might be surprised by this question, identifying the need for decision, but it's very easy for us to miss the need to make a decision, especially when there's no explicit problem. I mean, so many companies miss the need to make a decision around COVID-19. If we look back, if we remember back to that hallowed time a few months before, when COVID-19 was just a disease somewhere in the middle of China, very few people were paying attention to it. But some people were. So companies like Twitter, Google, and those are technology companies. There are a few other companies that I know about. They made sure to look at the transitioning to home early onward. They anticipated that this would get pretty bad. So they looked at that transition and they made sure to prepare early onward for their companies. And that's what I strongly advise my clients to do, to get prepared early in case this becomes worse, more serious. I mean, Wuhan doesn't sound like a major city, but it's actually one of the largest cities in the world, has 11 million people, produces over $22 billion in revenue. It's called the Chicago of China. It's kind of in the middle of China, just like Chicago is in the middle of the US. It has something like 200 international flights per day. So carrying, an average, maybe 500 people per flight, let's say that's 10,000 people per day outside of Wuhan. So this is definitely going to spread outside of it. And a number of people were looking at this. I was looking at this too. So this is something that a lot of companies failed to recognize in a timely manner. They looked at the situation, they said, well, previous diseases passed us by, and they didn't look at how this situation, COVID-19, was different than the past. Just like many companies missed the fiscal crisis of 2008, 2009, overwhelmingly, this was missed. So there's important ways that we tend to not notice the need for a decision to be made. That's a big problem. Or of course, we took a look at where I mentioned before, where Polaroid failed to make the decision to go into digital cameras, where there was really a need for a decision to be made. I mean, Kodak also went bankrupt because it didn't go into digital cameras. Digital cameras were actually invented in Kodak first in 1983, but then they decided to put them on the back shelf because they didn't have the profit margin that physical film does. So this is a common issue, and this happens often. This is hard. It's hard for us to make a tough decision, especially about an employee. We ignore employees who are suffering and who, because they're not in the right role, they're not in the right place, and sometimes maybe their skills are not aligned with the changing world. So we ignore the need to make tough decisions around employees, tough decisions, in all aspects of our relationship. Our instincts making it uncomfortable to make tough decisions, I see this mostly around people. We need to recognize the need to make a decision before it becomes a true emergency, like it did for that Vistage member whose VP went to work for the competitor and was stealing information earlier. He could have recognized this, but he didn't. It was very uncomfortable for him to look the facts straight in the face. Second, gather information from diverse perspectives. So this is really important to do. You want to look at information from different people, and you want to especially put higher value on people with whom you disagree. So for example, talking about taking over a company, there's a lot of experts that you talked about. Another area of expertise that I'm not sure if there's tapped was people who are in risk management. So looking at various risks and problems associated with the mergers and acquisitions. The problem with the typical people who are involved with mergers and acquisitions, bankers and so on, M&A people who are lawyers and so on, is that they benefit from the merger or the acquisition going through. So they have a strong financial benefit in most of them, not for all of them, but most of them in the merger or the acquisition going through. Whereas you don't have voices from people who are in risk management, who are looking at, hey, what are all the risks? What are all the problems? Who get rewarded for pointing out all the problems. And that's a typical area where I see companies going wrong. They go to people who are incentivized to make something happen. And they don't go, when they are thinking about launching a project, they don't go to people who are devil's advocates, who point out all the problems. And you really should know about all the problems. You can certainly go ahead knowing about all the problems, but then you can fix the problems in advance. And sometimes you'll find out that it's just not worth it. So that's something to think about. They help you recognize your bias blind spots. For me as an optimist, I make sure to get perspectives from pessimists to make sure that I recognize my own blind spots. Then you want to set specific and clear goals. So set specific and clear goals for what you're going forward. I mean, for mergers, since we're talking about that, I have no idea what Sears and Kmart were doing merging. That was a terrible, terrible idea. There were two retailers who were pretty similar, department stores, both not succeeding, and then they merged to make a larger failing entity that eventually failed. It was not helpful, not a good idea, and they didn't have a clear plan going forward. AOL and Time Warner, another classical example of no clear plan for going forward. They just wanted to merge the old and the new, and it sounded inspiring, but there was no benefits to their merger, really no benefits. You want a clear vision of the desired outcome, what you want to achieve, especially when it seems like a one-time decision. So for example, if you're consistently going over time or over budget, it's likely to not be just a one-time fluke. It's an aspect of your systems, processes, and goals that you need to understand and address in advance of future decisions. You want to look back at the past and you want to address in the future. You want to look at underlying systems and processes. So make addressing them part of your desired outcome. Then develop clear decision-making criteria. So let's say you're trying to hire a key employee. You want to develop criteria around this key employee. I mean, their salary requirements would be one, their fit in the company would be another, their experience in the field, that in your field, their richness of contact, their Rolodex or whatever, their LinkedIn profile, connection network, the modern equivalent of the Rolodex. All of these criteria and other criteria that might be relevant to you. Maybe their fit, you want somebody who is a pessimist if your team has too many optimists, something like that. And you'll use these criteria to weigh your options. Then make sure to weigh the criteria on a scale from 1 to 10. So if you're doing quite well financially, the salary requirements might be less important. So you could say, maybe there are 4 if you're doing well financially. But if you really need somebody who is going to cognitively be different than the rest of your team because you need that voice, you can say, being a pessimist, you can put at an 8 or 9. And somebody, let's say, with experience in the field, you can put that at 6. So what you want to do is weigh these criteria relative to each other on a scale of 1 to low to 10 to high. Then generate viable options. So you want to think about viable options. So if we're hiring someone, that would be, of course, people who you're hiring. You want at least 5 viable options that you're happy with. I see so often, this is not the time for satisficing, but so many Vistage members, so many leaders of various companies, various levels, they just want to make the decision and go forward because they're busy, they're preoccupied, and they don't realize how much it will cost them going forward to not have sufficient viable options. You want at least 5 that you're satisfied with, that you're happy with, that you think would do great to make a good decision. So 5 viable options before you make a major decision going forward. Then evaluate these options. So here you compare these options and the criteria. So salary requirements, cognitive diversity in the company, shall we say it that way, experience in the field, Rolodex, and then you multiply the rankings by the weightings, and then you get a clear, simple numerical score. You want to especially be aware of going with your initial preferences. So if you clicked with someone during an interview process, you want to be wary of that because you might be falling into the halo effect. This is something quite dangerous. I was giving a presentation, or you might be, if you don't like someone, you might be falling into the horns effect. I was giving a presentation once at the Diversity Inclusion Conference here in Columbus, Ohio. So this was over 100 diversity inclusion HR personnel. So these are diversity inclusion experts. And something important to understand about Columbus is that it's the home of the Ohio State Buckeyes. So Buckeyes are very big here. People are really passionate about them. So the people at the conference were from Central Ohio, a lot of overwhelmingly Buckeyes fans. And our big opponent, our big rival is the University of Michigan Wolverines. It's one of the biggest rivalries in college football. So I asked them, those people who are overwhelmingly Buckeyes fans, how many of you would hire a University of Michigan fan? So these diversity inclusion experts, over 100 of them, only 3 people said that they would hire a University of Michigan fan. And I have this on video, so fortunately it was videotaped. So this was a really powerful moment where we could see how impactful the horns effect can be on the hiring and promotion process. So you want to look at your preferred choices in a harsh light. And if you don't like someone, don't click with them. You want to give them a little bit more of positive regard because of our tendency to fall into the halo effect or the horns effect. Then, implementation. So we're going from the decision-making process to preparing to implement. Now, this, just like the previous step, you want to imagine that the decision completely failed. So give yourself permission to envision that it completely failed. Of course, you're most likely doing this as part of a team because it's a major decision. So have everyone in the team imagine that it completely failed, absolutely failed. And then anonymously write out all the reasons why it failed. Brainstorm problems, what might have led to this failure, and consider how you might solve these problems. So how you might solve these problems in advance, and integrate the solutions into your plan. So let's say if the person you hired turned out to be have a problematic personality, so personality challenges, you can make sure that you spend more time evaluating their personality. Ask their references. There are ways of asking the references specific questions that get people's personalities in a way that's beyond the sheen of, yay, this is a great person. And so you can, if this is something that you're concerned about, you can ask about their personality in various ways that they would be personable. And of course, you can interact with them in person or virtually nowadays. Then you want to imagine, so that's part of implementation. And then you want to also imagine the decision absolutely succeeded. So the previous one, the 5-question process, that's for daily decisions you want to satisfy. This is for getting as perfect as possible. This is a really serious decision. When you're making a major employee, launching a new product, merger and acquisition, all of these. Imagine that it absolutely succeeded. And brainstorm all the reasons for success. Why might this have succeeded? And how you can bring these reasons into life. So for example, if somebody was succeeded and then, of course, integrate that into your plan. So you can imagine that this new employee succeeded because they were able to really fit into the team quickly and effectively. So then you can make sure that in their first weeks and months on the job, that they have a lot of meetings with members of their team. They spend a lot of time learning about them, and you create a structured process. Don't leave this to chance. So many companies leave this to chance. They think, okay, it'll naturally happen. There are lots of things that might or might not naturally happen. You don't want to leave things to chance that might not happen. You want to create a structure around this to make sure that certain things happen. And finally, this is the final step of the implementation process. What you want to do is evaluate how well the implementation is going, and then revise it as needed. And of course, for evaluation, you need to create metrics. What does it mean to succeed? What does it mean for this person to succeed as an employee? What does it mean for the merger and acquisition to succeed? For the merger and acquisition, so we talked about that. One thing I often advise my clients to do before they go into a full merger, a full acquisition, is, if it's at all possible, and it's usually possible, have a collaborative project in advance, a serious project that you work on for a few months before you do the merger or the acquisition. That helps you get at the internal culture of the company, so you understand what their internal culture is like. And the internal culture, it's very hard to see what the internal culture is like before you actually go forward. One of the reasons that Time Warner and AOL merger failed was that their internal culture was very different. So their internal culture of Time Warner was an old media company, AOL was a new media company, and they were just, very, very a lot of tensions, a lot of stresses, and that resulted in a major component of why the merger failed. So you want clear metrics of success. What does it mean to have a successful implementation? What does it mean for the merger and acquisition to be successful? You want clear stages of success for the hire. One of the things that you can do for a hire, and this is something I usually advise my clients to do for a key hire, is to have a process where the hire is evaluated by those around them every month during the first 6 months on how well they're doing, how well they're building the relationship, and so on. And if there's some issues that are discovered, then that can be addressed in advance. So you want to check these metrics, you want to make sure that they're meeting and succeeding, and you can revise the implementation. You can help this person fit in better. You can redirect how you're doing the merger and acquisition to make sure that you address some of the problems or whatnot. And you might find out that the original decision needs to be revisited, and that's okay too. So then you'll go back to the earlier steps in the process and revisit this decision. All right, so this is the 8-step process for making serious major decisions. Now, I want you to take a look at the poll. So as you can guess, there's going to be a poll on making the best decisions. So how helpful might it be for some or all of your team to use the making the best decisions technique for major decisions, for serious decisions, ones that you really don't want to get screwed up? How helpful might it be, some or all of your team? So 50% of the people voted. So let's wait for a couple more. Give 5 more seconds. All right, so let's take a look at the results. So this was overwhelmingly helpful, somewhat more helpful than the 5-question decision-making process for daily decisions. This is for major decisions you want to get seriously right, and this has been found. Folks are finding it really helpful, really important and valuable. So this is something for you to think about, especially if you're already going for a major decision like the merger and acquisition. You can still use this. You can still go through these steps and see if there's anything you missed. And of course, for upcoming decisions, which I'm sure a lot of you are thinking about, a wide variety of decisions, for you to lose this 8-step process, which you can get this as one of the post-webinar, post-presentation resources, post-training resources. All right. I want to take a little bit of time to discuss this now. What do you think? I mean, you've either found it moderately or most of you found it very helpful. What do you think would be helpful about it? What did you find valuable about it? What kind of insights did you have from this? So please share your thoughts, unmute yourself, and please go ahead.
This is Andrew. My view of this, we're working on some compensation things for sales folks, and we have no process. So as you would imagine, we go through some of these things kind of in a sporadic and uncorrelated way. And really what we're trying to identify is what works today works fine, but 3, 5, 10 years from now, what is the implication? And so, we touch on a lot of these subjects, obviously, but not in a format that's consistent. And so I think that would be helpful to us.
The consistency is definitely helpful because it allows people to know and think about all of these questions, okay, going through all of these steps, and then you can be quite confident about the quality of your decision-making process, that you went through all these steps, you discussed them, you hit each one, and you addressed all the points for each of these. So thank you for sharing. And definitely sales compensation is one of the issues that a lot of folks think about. And there's a lot of ways of getting it wrong and less ways of getting it right. So I'm glad that you're thinking about it. Others?
I think this has implications in various different aspects. And if this is one of the questions I have, is this should be this whole approach should be part of, if you adopt it, should be part of your culture. So it's not all on you as the CEO.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. It's something that my clients integrate as part of their organization, as part of their process. This is part of their business system, this is part of their process. So for any major decision, they go through this and they have their staff go through this and their leadership staff. So this is less so about people on the front line. This is about supervisors, managers, leaders. They go through this and this becomes part of their culture. It just becomes, just like some people use the EO system, or the other people use this system, or they put this on top of the EO system. So this is definitely something that a lot of people use and integrate as part of their culture.
I think this is not something you can do in a day, depending on the project. I know one of the members is looking at, okay, how do I reimagine the company in terms of cutting costs? Well, is it cutting costs or increasing productivity? Those are two different things.
Yes.
So different approaches, to the question.
Yep. And you would do different things to simply cut costs versus increase productivity. There are ways to increase productivity without cutting costs, because you'd get more revenue if you increase productivity. But yes, there's definitely ways of thinking about things differently and approaching things differently and having different tactics as a result.
Yeah, and I think also the other part of that is if you take that question and break it down a little farther, what are the top priorities that each company has? Is it cost management? Is it growth? Is it digital? Is it performance management, pricing, risk, restructure, M&A? What is it? It's different for every company.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can narrow that down on a relative basis to positive and negative effects on your company, now you got a process to use this through.
Definitely. Then you want to align folks on what your goals are, what your priorities are. That's really important to get that alignment. All right. Anybody else would like to share about something insightful they found, something surprising, some ways that they can use this? All right.
I thought they defunded the police. What's that police car going by?
My background, sorry. I'm in the hood, I guess.
Oh, are you?
Downtown, but yeah.
Okay.
Constant.
All right.
No worries. Okay. Let's put it on mute. So let's go ahead. We talked about how to make daily decisions. Brad, did you want to share something? Or no?
No, I'm good.
Okay, cool. Can we mute you?
Yep, sorry.
Perfect. All right. So we talked about daily decisions. We talked about major decisions. Let's talk about strategic planning and how you go forward to make effective strategic plans. Because as we talked about, planning fallacy is something that causes us to go wrong with our strategic planning very often. So there's a technique called Defend Your Future, which looks at a variety of scenarios, problems, and opportunities that you look at in your strategic plan. It doesn't simply create one strategic plan and says, go forward with this. That's when you tend to create, the binders that when the reality separates from your strategic plan, you just need to leave that in the bottom drawer because it just doesn't fit your current reality anymore and it's not necessary. This is not something that happens to Defend Your Future because it helps you look at a variety of options in the future and address a variety of options in advance. And it has 8 steps. First, you want to decide on the scope and goals of your plan. What area are you planning for? You don't need to make it for the whole company. You can make it for a certain area, and the scope, what area within this, what specific project. So you can focus on a specific project like an M&A if you want to do that. What are the strategic goals that you want to pursue? So as Tony mentioned, what are you focusing on right now? Digital, M&A, profit, cutting costs. Then the timeline, 6 to 60 months. That's the timeline that I advise. You said don't make it longer than 5 years. It's already getting pretty long if you make it 60 months. When you look at the research on our ability to predict the future, when you go anywhere beyond a year, it becomes quite a bit fuzzy. And of course, we can make mistakes within predicting the year. So COVID-19 was very hard to predict. But the essence is that the farther into the future you look, the fuzzier the future will be. So the more uncertainty, the more ambiguity there is, the less you can predict the future. And therefore, the more resources you need to address uncertainty and to address ambiguity. So the longer timeline, the less accurate you'll be, the more resources you'll need to plan into your plan to address uncertainty, ambiguity, planning fallacy. You want to gather your stakeholders, whoever's involved. Ideally, 4 to 6 stakeholders, definitely no more than 10. You want to have representatives with expertise in the matter at hand and authority. So let's say if you're doing digital as your major initiative right now, that's your major initiative, then you want people with authority, the IT lead, the people who are maybe the COO, maybe the CEO, and people who have expertise on digital transformation. So people within your team, people outside your team, if you hired someone to help you with digital, so you want them in the room as well. And I strongly encourage recruiting someone who's an independent facilitator. Your Vistage chair, your Vistage members who are here, members of your board of advisors, somebody like that, who can help guide this process. Then think about the future. What future do you anticipate? Draw out this future, whether digital, M&A, whatever future you're looking at. And what would it look like if there were no major changes, if it just went as you expected, if the plan went as you expected, what would it look like? How many resources would you acquire? And again, if you tend to underestimate resources, make sure to address this underestimation in advance and say, okay, we tend to underestimate by 8%, so build in 8% more as just you look at the future that you think will happen. Then think about unanticipated problems. What problems might come up that you don't expect? So I was recently doing this for a finance company that provides a number of finance services as an independent facilitator. It's a regional finance company based in the Northwest. And what I had them do is went for the first steps and then going to the unanticipated problems, writing out potential problems anonymously. This is really important to do because it's very easy to miss potential problems that are not anonymous, because people don't want to talk about political issues and political tensions that were not PC to talk about. It's not comfortable to bring them up. It creates personality issues and challenges. So you want to have people write these down anonymously and estimate the likelihood and the impact of each. So the finance company I mentioned, one of the problems that they wrote down was that COVID-19 would be longer and more impactful than they anticipated. I mean, we ideally would find the vaccine next year and then things would be addressed by at least 2022, but it can turn out to be quite a bit harder to find vaccine than we think, and therefore the COVID-19 would last into 23, 24, 25. So this was one of the problems that was brought up. Another problem that was more of a personality problem was that the clients were getting increasingly youthful for this finance company, so more millennials and so on, and the customer service team was getting a little bit out of touch with the way that they interacted with its clients. And this was not something that the customer service head, the VP of customer service, really wanted to hear. That was uncomfortable, but this was a really important fact to put on the table and talk about this. Hey, what's going to happen? We are serving a demographic that's becoming out of touch with the current customer service. I mean, if your customers are talking in different way, have different ways of thinking, different perspective on the future, then your customer service personnel, that's going to be attention, especially since the customer service personnel need to build up a good relationship with these customers. It's a long-term trusted relationship. So that was an issue. So determine these problems. These were the two most serious ones we determined, but for a merger and acquisition, there can be a whole number of problems. For a new hire, there can be a whole number of problems, whatever problems you're looking at for the next several years. So let's say if you're doing the merger and acquisition now, 2 weeks into a merger and acquisition, then think about what would happen in the next 5 years and what kind of problems might result. Tony brought up that they had to close a sanitation company within 2 years because the competitors didn't want to use it. Then brainstorm solutions. What kind of solutions can you have to these sorts of problems? So with COVID-19, what we looked at was, hey, maybe we can have much more virtual interactions. They already went virtual, of course, as part of the first part of the COVID-19. Then they were intending to go back into the office as things opened up. But as they realized that COVID-19 might last quite a bit longer than we anticipate, they decided to not go back to the office so quickly, see how long they can function virtually. And they figured out that they can function virtually. Most everything can function virtually. They just need to have someone come into the office occasionally, put in checks, all that stuff. So they decided to really decrease their office space, and that saved them quite a bit of money, their footprint. And for the customer service, despite the VP not feeling comfortable about this, they decided that they really need to have at least some turnover in the customer service department to make sure that they're serving the needs of millennial customers, their increasingly millennial customer base effectively. So that was another important dynamic. So identify the resources needed to solve the problems and update your strategic plan with this information. So that's one. Then unanticipated opportunities. What kind of opportunities might come into play that you don't anticipate, that you don't think about? Write them out anonymously, because some of these things you might not be realizing, you might not be thinking about. This is something that's really important. So the financial services company talked about, what we realized was that an opportunity for them is going to be that if COVID-19 is indeed worse than most people think, that there's too much of a rush back to get back to normal for many people, that their competitors will likely stumble as there's a second wave and so on, and they can take advantage of the situation to seize market share and hire away some good employees, especially ones who are in the millennial target age range that they're looking for. So that's something that they looked at as a major opportunity. So they determined that's a really promising opportunity, and how you want to brainstorm ideas, how to bring them about, seize them. So they started looking at how they started making a strategic plan about addressing, so that they're not surprised when their competitors are stumbling. They made part of the strategic plan how they will address them. Some marketing literature they created about how their company, financial services company, has taken steps A through H to be pandemic proof, and how the clients who are currently working with the competitors might be better off working with them instead. So things like this. You want to identify the resources needed to seize the opportunity. So that this was mostly money, time, strategic planning for the company I was working with, and update your strategic plan with this new information. Then think about dangerous judgment errors. So we talked about the assessment on cognitive biases. This is the best thing to use for dangerous judgment errors that might be part of the dynamic. And if there's no opportunity to do so, check for common cognitive biases. So there are 6 there are specifically these cognitive biases: loss aversion, status quo bias. So loss aversion has to do with the fact that we tend to orient toward avoiding losses more than we tend to orient toward gains. It's just a human tendency. That's our intuition from the savannah environment, when it was very dangerous to lose our resources because our life was very precarious and very much on the edge. So we don't invest the kind of resources that we need even when we should make those investments. So that's loss aversion. Status quo bias. This is our tendency to be too afraid of uncertainty and to stick to the current reality even when we should go ahead and we should change. So that's the status quo bias. Confirmation bias we talked about. Looking for information that confirms our beliefs and ignore information that doesn't. Attentional bias. That's when we tend to pay attention to what's most emotionally salient for us. So let's say since we've been talking about COVID-19, let's say with COVID-19, that is something that is emotionally salient to a lot of people. So they're thinking about a pandemic as a major disaster. But there are, of course, other disasters that might strike that they're not thinking about and they're not preparing for. Overconfidence, being way too confident about the quality of your decisions. This is way too common. This is what I talked about in the beginning, the need to develop humility about our decision. Optimism bias and pessimism bias, I talked about that. And halo effect and horns effect, I talked about that. Next, think about unknown unknowns. These are called black swans. You might have heard of it as called black swans in Taleb's book. You want to scan your environment for all sorts of major disruptors. Now, the COVID-19 was a predictable disaster. So that was not a black swan. That's what's called a gray swan, where it's a low probability, high impact, slow moving threat. And that is something that a lot of people were talking about, like Bill Gates, most prominently talking about, hey, this is something serious, really should be in protecting our society from this and our businesses from this. And unfortunately, too few people failed to listen to him. So too few people listened to him and very many didn't. So you can scan your environment for these potential disruptors for you, for your key stakeholders. For example, with Uber, let's take a look at that major situation. They didn't realize the importance, the relevance of the Me Too movement, how powerful that was going to become. And eventually, they were sued for sexual harassment because they did not really take into consideration how powerful the Me Too movement has become and how much a presence in our society it has become. And then the CEO was forced to step down. Uber paid a lot of money. This was very much of a problem for Uber because they didn't realize how the dynamics of this major disruptor. So you decide on the resources you need to address these issues. And I strongly encourage you to add 40% to account for truly unpredictable events. So some things you can predict and some things you can't. But you can protect against them with additional resources, mainly money in this case. So add these resources to when you think about how you address predictable disasters. For example, with the pandemic, you can buy pandemic insurance. There's a rider for that. That's an easy way to protect yourself from a lot of losses. Then you want to add, and there are other things you can protect yourself from.
Then you want to buy that, Andrew? Can you still buy that?
No.
We got an insurance guy in this.
How much money you want to spend? I'll sell it to you.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Munich Re is the major reinsurer that provided pandemic insurance, and they were describing, so there was description of how, some people bought it in advance, but there are very many who didn't, and then they were breaking down the doors of Munich Re. That's one of the two major reinsurer companies that in February, but no, they were not selling. You don't sell fire insurance for a house on fire. So unfortunately not. But yes, so you want to consider how you can make your plans resilient and flexible. The more resilient and flexible you can make them, the better off you'll be. And then, of course, communicate and take the next steps. So you want to communicate to your stakeholders, whoever your stakeholders are, about the consequences of this process, reserve the resources needed, and take the next steps. Okay, so you won't be surprised by this last poll on defending your future. So how helpful might it be for some or all of your team to use the Defend Your Future technique to inform your planning process? Please vote now. So you inform your strategic planning process. Okay. Great. Oh, everyone voted quickly on this one. So we see that just under 30% would find it somewhat helpful. Great. I'm glad that you would find it somewhat helpful so you can incorporate elements of this into your planning process, or all of it if you find it helpful. And 71%, large majority of you would find it very helpful. So that's something to really think about. Incorporating the whole plan or the whole process would be addressing all the cognitive biases that we tend to suffer from. You can, of course, adapt it to your needs to the extent that you want to, and that would be helpful for you. All right, so let's talk about this and see what kind of insights you had, what kind of realizations, where you think this technique might be most helpful for you. Please go ahead. Happy to take your questions on this and happy to listen to some insights.
I think what's most difficult here for smaller companies is they're so tactically involved every day. My question is, and we do this in big companies too, but you get them out of the element. This is all good, but I don't know that deep thinking can take place unless you take people out of their element of day-to-day tactical thinking.
You're absolutely right. This is where you do a leadership retreat for a day at least, and you go through your strategic plan for the whole company, for a part of the company. This is something really important to take the time to do separately. Of course, once you incorporate this into your thinking, you can see it and apply elements of it throughout your tactically as well. So let's say, what kind of anticipated problems you can have from this decision or anticipated opportunities. Those are things you can apply tactically daily. But to go for the whole process, you want to take some time a day for a leadership retreat.
But you have to do, I think, don't you have to do pre-work also in some of these issues? So in the world I come from, in business, we call them war games. You're not going to have one day and get all the unanticipated opportunities or the dangerous or the black swans. It takes a couple of months of some group or somebody having a strategy to everybody they talk to outside the company, vendors, customers, prospects, and kind of develop that mindset of what might be this black swan. What are, you don't say unanticipated opportunities, but you have to brainstorm these things in sort of a war game fashion, and you don't do that in one day. The war game is the actual game.
Yes.
But the prep time can take months.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Tony. So what I usually do with my clients is we have a 3-month period where the members of the team, so we identify members of the team who would be coming in to do the war game, facilitated exercise, and each member of the team looks at all of the things that are relevant to them. So scope and goals, anticipated future, anticipated problems, anticipated opportunities. They gather information from this, they have their own preliminary answers, and they bring this information to the table. So everybody is responsible from their own perspective, whether sales, customer service, operations, finances, and so on. They bring all this information to the table, and 3 months is a good time. If you don't have 3 months, you can do it in a month. I've done that too. It's a little bit more condensed, takes a little bit more time, but you do this as part of your daily work. This is not something that you extraordinarily spend a lot of time on. You just take advantage of, hey, this is one of my things I'm working on, maybe something like half an hour to an hour a week that you take to add information. If you're taking something like 3 months, obviously if you're taking a month, then it would take a little bit more time. So that's how folks prepare for it. Other thoughts, other comments about this technique?
I think when you take like a TVH or Randy's company versus, let's say, Jeremy and Andrew, who are younger companies, the process looks a little bit different. Now, Brad Carlson, I think, is evolved into where at some point in time in the next year or two, he can use this process with most of his management.
Yeah, I think it's a good, for me, I think it's a good perspective. And it's basically, you've wrote out like the you've the architecture of it, and now it's just a matter of actually utilizing it. I personally think the takeaway for me is it's my job as the CEO to make sure that we are defending the future. So therefore, I have to be the one that's driving this, and also knowing that the team members have to be the one bringing the information to it. But yeah, I think this is kind of what our job is to do to make sure that we're not lost. But it's not one person. And so I think the takeaway for me is this is a really good architecture of how to go about it. But like Tony said, it could take us years to become truly professional at it. And it's going to take educating the executive team, then educating the other leadership team members to be able to actually have this roll up and be of validity. Because I think traditionally smaller businesses under $100 million, the top 2 or 3 people, they're the ones that usually are making the decisions on where the organization's going. And this empowers a lot of other individuals as well, but we just got to make sure that we don't have inputs that basically, like you said, that will paralyze us. So yeah, there's a great takeaway for me. I think it's a really good structure. Once again, I just have to figure out how to palletize it and utilize it.
Yes, you definitely.
Jeremy, just curiosity. I know you're new, but you said it earlier. You had 2 other companies you wanted to do, and at some point in time, how does that process evolve as opposed to be different from where you are today with your current company?
Yeah, I mean, like in the context of this, I think it kind of goes to what you said a little while ago. It's, it almost seems like overkill potentially for a small company to kind of have all these steps for these different things. There are only, 1, 2, maybe even 3 decision makers, I guess you could say, within the company. I think instilling this into our culture now makes it that easy to scale, because then you don't have to do it once you've, reached a certain number or, certain amount of revenue or whatever. But, as we branch into, okay, well, hey, let's start, tech company number 1, let's start tech company number 2, having this fundamental, this fundamental process and culture, with this first company, as we begin to branch and scale, within the staffing company itself, I think it just makes it easier to do it. I mean, it's a lot easier to teach a new dog new tricks than it is an old dog new tricks. And, go into everything with this as, kind of the norm, not just some big new thing that we're trying to instill and, trying to get people on board with. I think that's just, that would make it easier, but it also kind of, I think, helps with, the decision making and hopefully avoiding as many big issues and big problems as you can, along the way by, having foresight with these kind of steps.
Right.
That's a really important insight, Jeremy. So, and I was going to mention that to Brad as well. What you want to do when you're a smaller company is start to integrate these as a process, as part of your culture, as part of your structure. And then as you grow, it will simply remain part of your culture, and you'll adapt it to your needs and expand it. But this is something that's going to be incredibly helpful as being part of a culture as you grow, because that everyone is going to be on the same team, on board with using this process, using elements of it, or using the whole process, depending on what you're looking at and how you're going forward to the future.
Yeah, I think the effort now makes it intuitive later. So that's obviously what you want. As you get bigger, you don't want to be bogged down by trying to focus on these little things just to be natural. And it's the expected way that, decisions, especially the big ones, are made.
All right, good
Absolutely.
point.
Absolutely.
I think the thing that comes to mind to me, Tony, is is COVID-19 a blip in the radar? Or, you hear a lot of kind of posing conversations talking about we're going to have a new norm. And if you look at that whole thing, you go, what we knew in the past may be different going to future. And quite frankly, we got about 90 days of experience about if there's going to be a new norm. I don't know if we're in that, kind of normalized yet. I think we're still in the middle of the battle. But what's the new norm going to be, and how's that going to impact, our future? So it's like, yeah, we got to defend our future, but I'm not quite sure we have as good of a grasp on, or at least we have as good of a grasp on what our future is going to be like than we had in the past. Just not as much clarity as there used to be, and I think we'll figure that out as we go. I mean, one of the advice you gave us, Tony, was, take what you know today, lay out the plan, and it's going to change and adapt as it changes, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a cliche, new normal.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at business 10 years ago, before the pandemic, it's evolved, right? Look at technology, how it evolved. Is that a new normal? I think it's a cliche. I think that there's so many aspects to it. It was the new normal that nobody's going to go to work. No, you can't do that. I was with somebody yesterday, and that comment came up, and it is that what we're missing. Oh, I was at a board meeting, audit committee meeting yesterday, and the question came up about bringing people back because you have SEC requirements, stuff like that. And quite honestly, one of the members said that the dilemma they're in is the employees, just the standard employees, whether it be accounts payable or finance or whatever. They miss the camaraderie of being able to turn around on their chair and ask Joe their opinion, because there's only so much you can do with Teams and all these collaboration online tools, and you can't look into their eyes like you can when you're with them.
I think the high performers want to be around other high performers, and everybody that I know, that I'm generalizing right now, it's like, oh, I love working remote, I love doing this, it gives me flexibility. It's like, yeah, it's because you're not in high performance mode. You're in like, I want a job, I want to be around my kids, I want flexibility. It's like everybody that I'm around that's like, no, I want to be back in because we're so much more effective. And that piggybacks off that, Tony. I agree.
Yeah, my concern is you know, probably more seasoned people can, at least in our area, can probably be pretty effective. But what do you do with your newer people, and how do you mentor them in a virtual environment? Because I mean, I learned a lot in life by just being around people and watching how they handle situations and all of that type of stuff. And when you're remote, you don't get that benefit. So how do you groom and mentor the newer people in a virtual environment? I'm struggling with that at this point in time. So you get if I just take someone in a simple job like a billing person, there's a process that you have to learn, and today we mentor those people. There's just we put them under a new person under a seasoned person, and they just groom them along. Unless there's a conscientious effort to do that every day, I don't know how you bring that new person along to kind of work through the process. So it's, to me, the remoteness is the concern about how we mentor new people and bring them on board.
Well, I was with Kevin yesterday, and I see he just joined us, but that was similar conversation about his classes.
Yeah.
You can train somebody online, I guess, to be a junior programmer, but how that programming is applied in the real world takes some hands-on environment. Kevin, am I wrong, or?
No, I would agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. Take some of that.
So where you want to be thinking about, and I think this is a really important conversation, how the challenges with virtual interactions. I mentioned the financial firm that I was working with. What they did is they made a plan for various scenarios. And this is what the Defend Your Future helps you do. When you have various scenarios, when you say, hey, if there's no second wave, if at least in our area it's going to be fine, this is what we'll do. If there is a second wave and it's not so serious, we'll do plan B. This is going to be part of the problems. If it's going to be really serious, and right now, it's not too bad in Missouri, but it's getting pretty bad. And I have a client in Arizona and Phoenix area, especially. It's getting pretty bad. Their hospitals are almost full. And I'm being very serious here. They had something like 2 ICU beds approved for COVID-19 left yesterday. So that's not a situation where you want to be going out. That's not a situation where you want, despite all of these problems with virtual interactions, Texas is getting worse. Oregon is getting worse. Utah, so the Republican governor of Utah just paused the reopening just because it was getting so bad. So you want to have contingency plans available for the situation where it will get bad. And it might, hopefully, Missouri will not be like Arizona or Utah, but it can happen. And that's something for you to be aware of. And that's where the contingency planning, looking at various options, various futures that you might be getting into, and defending yourself in each of these futures where there's an anticipated problems of COVID-19 becoming worse, then that's how you can protect yourself.
What's interesting about that is I thought it didn't do well in warm climates. So, I mean, that would tell me people are sitting inside their air conditioning units and getting it that way. I don't know.
No, it's not. That's been proven to be wrong. The COVID-19 right now is spreading fastest in Brazil. So Brazil is the biggest center. The U.S. has the most deaths, but the Brazil is growing faster than in the U.S. So no, it's not really slower. It's maybe a little bit slower. It might be a little bit slower, so it'll hit us harder in November and October than it did in October and November than it is right now. But it's definitely not slowed down too much by cold climates because, Brazil.
Jeremy, you tell me your nurses, is that their specialty? Dealing in the
COVID units?
Yeah.
We have some. Yeah, I mean, it's really more of like an ICU specialty. Really, we have med-surg nurses working in COVID facilities and stuff. It's a little bit of everything except for OR in the cath lab.
Yeah.
All right. Great. So I think we talked about defending your future. So this is where I want to mention the resources before we open it up for any final questions. So additional resources. Ignore the tinyurl.com. I'll just do polling because it's easiest. So free coaching session with me on integrating this information. I think we talked about some folks who are working on the planning fallacy for whom that's more salient, some the mergers and acquisitions, or any of these techniques and integrating them or parts of them into your organization. Then free books, digital books. Never Go With Your Gut. That contains the assessment itself. So I talked about the assessment, you're getting the assessment. The book contains the assessment. So that will be part of what you get. And then Resilience, Adapt and Plan for the New Abnormal, the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. That contains the 8-step process for making the best decisions and the Defend Your Future technique. So you'll get those. So, and that's the book covers. So I want you to take a look at the polling option for one last poll.
And we get those, electronically?
Yes, yep, digital books.
Okay.
No problem. So please vote if you want to get those. Would you like to get those? Please go ahead and vote, everyone. And I won't be sharing this. So I see 62% of the people voted.
Brad, you got to vote.
What?
Oh, Brad Slatton.
All right, everyone voted. Great. So yes, so everyone voted to get the resources. Great. So and I will send them after the presentation, just letting you know. All right. So this stage, I'll be happy to take any and all questions about any and all aspects of the presentation. So not simply defend your future, anything that you want to talk about, any realizations, any insights, anything that you want to chat about.
You may think about it in terms of, and it may lead into our executive session, but in terms of things that you're doing today, and how something that we did during this presentation resonates that you might carry forward in something that you're dealing with today.
I mean, for me, the reality.
I think
We were doing okay till somebody froze.
I think Brad froze, so hopefully he'll come back and share what he has to say.
That's the
Might be
first,
connection.
that's the first frozen we've had today.
Okay, well that's good. Okay, so Brad, once Brad comes back, he'll share what he had to share. Other folks, what kind of insights did you have on based on this, and that you can take insights going forward?
I think the thing that I kind of got from is, like I said a little while ago, it's, I think it's big company thinking that, us small companies and newer companies can really, instill into our culture and, again, make it so you don't have to be an old dog learning new tricks, and you can make it intuitive by the time you don't really have the luxury of, tons and tons of time to, make some big decisions. And, those big decisions have a lot more impact than they do now. And on that also, go Bucks. I'm from Ohio. I worked at Ohio State for a while as well. So
Yes, I think that's really insightful. As we talked about, a lot of startups are integrating these sorts of techniques into their culture as they're starting up, because they know that it'll be much easier if they create systems and processes, effective systems and processes on decision making and risk management as they're starting up their organizations, their cultures, than integrating them later when they become big. So the earlier you can integrate them, even if you integrate only certain components of them, the better off you'll be as you grow. And of course, it'll help you grow, but also the better off you'll be as you grow and make them part of your culture. Anyone else has any thoughts? Anything that you want to share? Anything that you have questions to ask? Tony, I think you're talking, but you might want to unmute.
Okay, Brad, you're back now?
Yeah, I'm here. My computer died.
No worries, it happens. What did you want to share, Brad?
So my perspective, and everybody's at different points in their career on here, different leadership levels. But for me, and obviously it tracks back to what Randy was saying in relation to like people being on site. We have a lot of younger individuals. We have a lot of younger individuals that have basically come in maybe in the VP of operations role and are being pushed and driven towards a chief operations role. And they have the, I'll say, behaviors, they have the values. However, they don't have the same skill sets that I'm learning here with you guys. I've had Tony for 8 years. I do a lot of self-help things, and this is an example of like, this is amazing information here, but being able to bottle this up and communicate it, teach it, things like that. That's really where I have to find some takeaways from this. And though you did a great job, what I would say, drawing it down to purity, I have to be able to take away elements, and I broke it into kind of 3 or 4 segments, but there's tremendous tools here that I have to basically try to teach those individuals. So going forward, I mean, what's your perspective or guidance as I grow my ability to coach? I have to be able to draw what you've taken here and actually implement it, and then make it part of our culture, and then reinforce it and teach those individuals how to communicate it ongoing. And that's the biggest challenge that I see right now, is I'm bringing all these great younger individuals in, but they have no experience when it comes to psychology of how they think in relation to the business and others.
One of the things that might be really helpful is to have folks that you're bringing in, after they had a little bit of exposure to the company, to have them take the assessment on dangerous judgment errors in the workplace and have that be as a basis, because that provides awareness and investment. They can see, okay, these are issues, these are problems, because then you need to get that awareness, you need to get that emotional investment as a basis for future efforts to address it. Not simply say, hey, use these decision-making techniques, but here are the kind of problems that we have in the company, or that in general result from failing to use the best decision-making techniques. And you want to be aware of these problems so that you can spot them in the company, in your own behavior, in your own decision-making, and be aware of how they impact you going forward, how the damage, the danger that results from it. Then you can communicate and convey to them the kind of techniques they can use to address this. And the 5 questions technique is the easiest one, of course, to start with. It's casual, it's daily, and by using that daily technique, they reinforce the use of these techniques, and then you can build up to more complex techniques for major decisions and for defending your future, for strategic planning.
Well, you're right. It's a culture thing, but getting back to Brad's comment, it goes back to ownership thinking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in my day, when you took a job, you wanted to work like you owned the company, and that's a different conversation right now.
Yeah.
I think some people want it. They just need the tools and resources to be an experience to be able to absorb it. And I think these dynamics, I mean, I think the 5 questions is a great starting point. That could be something that's implemented immediately. We have a weekly conversation on our Friday afternoon meeting where we just check in with it and people touch base with it. And then the other 2, the making the best decision and then the defend your future. I think those are large scale initiatives that are going to have to be absorbed really well by the executive team and then delicately driven through the course of the next 3 to 5 years. So, but
that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. And in terms of ownership thinking, that's something that Tony brought up. What I find is that the people who have the most potential in terms of ownership thinking, people who have the most potential for being leaders, well, you know, ownership thinking identifies someone who is a future leader. So when they start in a company, they are the ones who tend to absorb this information the fastest and apply it the most effectively.
And the reason is because those people aren't afraid of making a decision, or making a mistake. You know, our job is to make sure they don't make catastrophic mistakes. But once you identify somebody who is not afraid of voicing their opinion, of making a mistake, now the tools you give them are embraced.
Yeah. And they also feel responsible for fixing mistakes they make and for not making less mistakes in the future, which these tools are great for.
Mm-hmm. Randy, any comments?
I don't know if I have too much more to add. I mean, again, we talked a little bit, and I'm being somewhat redundant here, but to me, it's the concern I have with virtualization is mentoring and how do you instill, your culture and kind of like Brad said, your, ownership thinking. I think it's just more difficult. So, I mean, all that to say, we're moving back into the workplace. I'm very much an advocate for that at this point in time. We've got kind of mixed opinions on that within our leadership team because there's some benefits to not doing it. But, I can't wait to get back into the office, get into the game more than you are today and try to deal with the mentoring and the culture.
Great.
Jennifer?
So I see us doing some of this at a higher level. I do it with my team, but I definitely see opportunities to share this with some of the directors and department heads that aren't doing. And I think it's really good as far as a framework for walking through it. So, I think even though we do strategic planning on my team on an annual basis, when it comes to kind of the daily decisions, sometimes you don't really think through all of these things. And so for me, I think it really provides a good framework, the 5 questions, that you started with in particular. Just kind of checking those boxes, I think, as you think through the decisions that you're making. And then at a higher level, really getting into, I think Brad referenced the more, detailed techniques. And I think those are the things that, we could be sharing at the executive and the director level. There's a number of departments that don't necessarily think strategically or do strategic planning. I think, you know, sharing this with them and working toward that, it would be a good step in the right direction for us.
Excellent. Glad to hear that you can use this for a variety of purposes.
Yeah, I think those 5 questions are both strategic and both daily tactical thinking. Kevin, you missed the 5 questions, but you know, basically, it's avoiding decision disasters, whether they be short-term, long-term, or in between. And they were: what important information did I not yet fully consider? What dangerous judgment errors did I not yet address? What would a trusted and an objective advisor suggest I do? How have I addressed the ways this could fail? And 5, what new information would cause me to revisit my decision?
I have them up on my video right now, so you can take a look
We'll
at them.
get a copy of it for everybody.
Of course I will. Yes, that's part of the resources that I'll send.
Andrew, are you muted or gone? You're at lunch.
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay. Got any comments?
Oh, I think, you know, my biggest takeaway is along the lines of putting structure to some of the decision making naturally. You know, I always think it's comical when you have very arrogant executives. Sometimes if they're hired guns and haven't been in a startup business like we all have, or most of us have, you know, you're making decisions all the time with limited information, and you're trying to get to the least catastrophic best outcome as possible. And so putting some framework to that is critical, and we still haven't done it in the structured manner which, you know, we talked about today. So that's my biggest takeaway, is to continue to try and add structure to that.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right. Dr. Gleb?
All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad that this has been helpful for you folks in a whole variety of ways. And for those who have voted that they want resources afterwards, I'll be happy to send the resources so you'll have all of this information and that you'll be able to provide it to your teams, use it yourself, provide it to your teams at all levels. Thank you very much again for having me, and have a great executive meeting.
So do we stay on this platform?
Yes. Yeah, you stay on this platform.
Okay, so what do you have to do?
I am going to, hold on. I'm going to turn hosting over to you. So you should see that you're the host now, and that you can manage all aspects of the presentation.
Okay, I got it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So
Welcome.